Nerdrotic.com.
Welcome, travelers, to the fringes of reality, where the strange and mysterious meet, and the thin veil between fact and fiction is torn. Welcome to the Forbidden Frontier.
Bravo! And we're a podcast that has a live audience. That is authentic applause. Authentic applause. Welcome to the Forbidden Frontier. Hey, the time changed and we're on time. Don't get used to it. Just want to tell you that. I'm looking at you, chat. I already see you going off on us. We have a great show lined up for you today. Going to talk about a lot of fun stuff, but let's get to business over with. Let's do the ad read from our wonderful sponsor.
Let's pay some bills.
Let's pay some bills. Keep the lights on. Americans confident in healthcare is at a 24-year low. Yeah, that's a new administration, and change is with the new administration, changes on the horizon, but change takes time and your health can't wait. That's why I'm taking control of my own health with Field of Greens, and I got it right here. This stuff is legit, by the way. It's actually good. We all know eating healthy is key to staying healthy. I will show it in a second. Give me I got to finish reading first because I can't
and then
show
you present.
Oh, is that what I'm supposed to do? It didn't say that on the script, Gary.
No? Okay. Well.
We're making a new script.
We got Field of Greens. We got Brick House. I can't see myself.
Oh my God.
Very nice.
That one is like my favorite flavor.
Snap right into focus, all sexy like.
Yeah, it was great.
Real organic superfood. We got this. And did I not do it fast enough?
I had it
That's
up.
what she said.
There we go.
Yeah.
There.
And real organic superfood. And as Kurt Metzger so eloquently put last time, is I'm not usually into the green stuff, but this stuff's actually pretty good. Most of the green stuff makes me sick to my stomach, and this doesn't. I actually enjoy it. Brickhouse Nutrition, Field of Greens. We all know eating healthy is key to staying healthy, but life gets busy, and sticking to a perfect diet isn't always realistic. Field of Greens makes it easy. It's whole fruits, vegetables. That's it. And we could all use more of that in our diets. That's for sure.
It's true.
Just one drink, and I've got my healthy head start of the day. That's right. Every fruit and vegetable in Field of Greens is doctor selected for specific health benefits. There's heart health group, lungs, kidney, and metabolism groups, even healthy weight group. And Field of Greens promises at your next checkup, your doctor will notice your improvement health or your money back. I've got a 20% discount to get you started. Go to fieldofgreens.com and use code Nerdrotic. That's fieldofgreens.com, code Nerdrotic. Thank you, Field of Greens. Hey, there's also a turkey trip, right?
Now, this is our thing, okay? Well,
Yeah.
Wandering Wolf is putting it on, but we're going, all right?
Yeah.
So if you want to go with us to Turkey, go see Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, all the Tepes, all the
Hang out
popular
with
hills.
us.
Darren Kuyu.
Darren Kuyu.
Oh yeah. The underground, the famous Darren
Yes.
Kuyu underground city.
Yeah.
I cannot wait for that. I cannot wait for that.
Legendary.
So if you want to come hang with us, have some dinners, and explore a country with us, sign up. We already had a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our Peru trip was amazing with Michael Collins, and
So good.
all we did was just kind of hang out and explore and
Touch rocks.
and it wasn't even
nubs.
like hurting cats. We all wanted to go like just be adventurous. Nobody argued. It was really weird, Mika.
Yeah.
Out of this group of strangers, nobody argued. We all got along. Some people ate some guinea pig, which was disgusting.
It was
They
great.
were dressed
It was delicious.
up too. It was really
It was a
weird.
good time. But I'd like to introduce our special guest. If you've been around ufology, See, that's why I hate UAP, because you can't call it UApology. It's ufology. It just works better. Ancient Civilizations, you've been to any conferences? This guy's probably been to it. He's got a podcast. He's a writer, podcaster, researcher, and speaker whose interests cover a variety of subjects, including history, archaeology, and science. And he's read a ton of the books that I have on Audible. Micah Hanks, how's it going, man?
It's good to be here. In fact, wonderful.
There you go.
It's good to see everybody here. Well, I had no idea there would be such a turnout, but I mean, it's great to have him here.
Yeah, for some reason people watch. I have been questioning it since I started my channel. I probably should stop. Just be grateful. Thank you. One of the things, I was listening to a bunch of your podcasts today. So let's just start out with it. Disclosure is something we've discussed a lot on this, and we all have kind of our different opinions about it. As I told you before the show, sometimes I'm really in, and sometimes I'm like, I'm not so sure. I want to believe, and I definitely believe we have stuff. I believe we have stuff. I believe we're reverse engineering. It's just, when are we going to find out? Are we going to find out? And you were one of the ones who helped break the Grush story, correct?
That is correct. Yeah. That author, of course, the article was written by Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal, who had been the authors of the 2017 piece that was published in the New York Times, which first brought to public attention the fact that there had been within the Defense Intelligence Agency, again, up until that point, essentially a secret UAP investigative program. And that was kind of, that big turning point, the so-called shot heard around the world, when people who had maybe only been marginally interested in UAP or UFOs, again, to your point, I'm totally fine with still saying UFOs, as long as we're all talking about the same thing, right? Aerial phenomena. And personally, I like ufologists too. I kind of, reluctantly grew into that term myself. And that's an interesting thing about all this. Prior to 2017, I was like, look, I study aerial phenomena. I study ancient mysteries, Göbekli Tepe and the places, in Turkey that you were talking about there fascinate me. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a lot of the things we talk about at the Cosmic Summit, I'm all over that. And I love archaeology. And so I was resistant to want to be branded a ufologist, but I've grown into it because since 2017 now, people who have been doing this for decades, like myself, have now kind of, to an extent, been vindicated, at least so far as the fact that we now know that people in government agencies, organizations, within the intelligence community and also, within the Department of Defense, have taken this subject seriously. And they have worked really hard to reduce stigmas that have prevented a couple of things. One, the credibility factor, which had impeded military reporting. A lot of armed personnel have been having encounters with UFOs or UAP for many decades. But there was a time where, not so long ago, if you reported that, you'd get the side-eye glance, your buddies would start playing the X-Files theme, and you'd be made fun of or ridiculed. And not so much even in the armed services was that the case as it is in commercial aviation. Pilots, even still. I mean, it can be a career ender to say, yeah, I was flying at 33,000 feet and I saw something weird that looked like a Tic Tac fly by me. They're concerned about losing their jobs, their medical history being, questioned, and whether they are fit for being able to, again, take the responsibility of flying an aircraft with, human lives at stake. So all these issues, again, had really compounded over the years, made it very hard for people to credibly talk about this. Scientists never wanted to touch it. Yet again, career ending. They were concerned about being able to study it with funding because you couldn't get any. So they often didn't touch it for simple funding reasons. Now, we actually have efforts led by Avi Loeb of the Harvard University, but of course he's got the Galileo Project, where now he's getting private funding to apply science toward this and do real serious scientific investigation, write peer-reviewed papers. We're now in the second most recent iteration of government programs, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is, again, out there investigating and actually applying new technologies toward collecting data about UAP. And finally, pilots are starting to come forward. So it's a very interesting time for people who've been involved in this for a long time, like I have. I'm happy to see this, but as far as when are we going to know the truth, when are they going to reveal the secrets? That's as ever-present a question as it has ever been. And that going all the way back to the end of the Second World War, when people first started saying Does our government know more about this subject than they are telling us? And at what point will they release that information?
What do you think the limitation is? Like some of the documents that we're getting about the Epstein stuff, whatever, disregard that. But they're saying it's going to be very redacted, very heavily redacted. But at least they're admitting there's something. With disclosure, we haven't even gotten to the point of there's something. It's complete hush. We're barely squeaking in. What is the catalyst do you think it's going to take for them to finally just say we have something?
Well, I would argue that the government does say we have something. And maybe a good way to answer that question would be to start with, what do they admit that they have? First of all, since back during the Defense Intelligence Agency effort, which was called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, or AAWSAP, and that, of course, was the program that was doing a lot of its investigations out there at the mysterious Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, which I visited for the first time last September, and we can get into that a little later.
Yes.
Very interesting to have finally, kind of made it out there. That's sort of a bucket list thing for a lot of people who study this stuff. Yeah. But with the more recent iterations of the government investigations, which were the UAP task force, which again was there were multiple agencies within government, within the IC or intelligence community, and then also within the DoD reporting on to this investigative task force, but it operated out of the Navy. That was succeeded in 2022 by the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is the current UAP investigative office in government. Since that initial UAP task force investigation began in the summer of 2020, there have been a lot of reports collected, and they acknowledge that. So that's one thing we know. They say we are collecting reports from military personnel. We have some good cases. There is video. There are good images. We have multi-sensor data that, again, in other words, if these things produce radio frequencies, or if they are emitting, things that are only detectable in infrared ranges as opposed to visible, they've collected information in those spectra and in those mediums as well. Now, the problem is, to your point, well, when are they going to show us all the good stuff? One of the main reasons why they don't, at least according to the official narrative, and having gotten to know a lot of these officials myself, including the former director of the task force, they will tell you, again, it's not so much that we're trying to hide the fact that there are genuine anomalies we're studying. What we have to try and protect is the methods, the technologies that can be used to collect that information. But you look at lawmakers like Marco Rubio, currently our Secretary of State, but he was formerly a senator for many years. And he, of course, had attended all these briefings and said he'd been briefed on UAP for more than a decade. Back in February of 2023, when we had the Chinese spy balloon incident, there was a classified briefing for lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and he came out of that briefing and he said, what really frustrates me is 99% of everything that they just told us in that classified briefing, it's nothing that the American people could not be told. I don't know why this stuff is so secretive. So really, I think that to answer that question, when are we going to know? We'll know once we deal with the issue that's currently happening within the intelligence community in the Pentagon, which is overclassification. Yes. The previous director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, that, of course, that position has been succeeded now by, from Hawaii, what's her name? Gabbo.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard. Thanks. Yeah, give her a nickname, Gabbo. But anyway, Tulsi Gabbard. We have to wait and see if Tulsi's going to be. She said that she'll study UAP, but it's kind of early on to see where her tenure is going to take her and how much she'll tackle this. But the former director, Avril Haines, she straight up said, look, we've got a huge overclassification issue in government, and we need to address that. Now, I will say that based on how she talked about these issues during the confirmation hearings, Tulsi Gabbard had certainly seemed to indicate that she agreed on that point. And again, like you guys said, a couple of you previously having been in podcasting with regard to politics, I don't blame you in this volatile environment that we're in now, kind of wanting to step away from that. I used to do it too. But I will say this, it seems that in the current administration, there does seem to be at least a leaning toward trying to be open and transparent about a lot of these issues. And that's certainly something that I'm hopeful about, because if they have those same issues that all these career intelligence officials do, come on, guys, there's not really stuff being withheld that the public can't know about. It's not going to hurt anybody. I hope that prevailing attitude sees some action put behind it, and maybe we'll see something sooner rather than later to answer that question.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. But I'm still going to run with the theory, and maybe this is a little nihilistic, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but I'm still going to run with the theory that even if we do hear something, most people are not going to believe it because it comes from the government, and the government has certainly earned that mistrust. And it's just going to be on it sucks because it a legit whistleblower, man, putting their life on the line, especially with this. There's a lot of like real dangers with this, and they're going to have to do more. And you're asking a lot from people on that, with still the media apparatus where it's more accepted now, Micah, but like it'll still be laughed at. It'll be all silly spacemen and little green men. We'll still get a lot of that crap too. And I understand the nuance of this and how difficult it is, but just as a pure viewer, man, I wish we got more stuff. I do. I really do.
Yes. Oh, me too.
Yeah.
And I'll further say, by the way, I mean, I'm as frustrated as some of the skeptics, frankly, who say, it's wonderful to have these whistleblowers. It's wonderful to have these people saying they've signed NDAs. It's wonderful to see these, career professionals going on the record, risking a whole lot more than just their credibility. I mean, risking a lot of things to go on the record and say, look, there is a there. When I worked in government, I was aware of it. There were many more who were aware of this too. And we're also aware of the fact that the public should be told more about this and how much the government knows. It's wonderful to hear all this. But on the skeptical side, where I can kind of, sympathize with that position is, yeah, but guys, you say you've seen all this stuff. You say that there's all this evidence. Surely there must be something more that you can show us. I mean, again, going back to 2017, look at those three videos. Technically, 2 had been leaked at that time. 1 had been, floating around out there on the internet for years already because it had been leaked. And that was the famous Tic Tac.
Yep.
Fascinating case, by the way, to this day. But you would think that, again, with all these discussions about videos and imagery and things, that we would see a little bit more by now. So I'm frustrated by that too. And there are certain days of the week where I think I'm looking at it going, I have no doubts based on all the people I've interviewed, just as a personal investigator, who studied this phenomenon for decades myself. Only a couple of decades, but I mean, I'm not that old, but I mean, there are decades behind me in the work I've done. I have no doubt that there are phenomena out there and extraordinary vehicles that currently we don't understand where they're from. But I really do wish that we could get more from those in officialdom who say we've seen the goods, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, especially what you just said, you've been doing this for decades and you've interviewed countless people. So your knowledge of the different stuff in this world is just layered and layered and layered, right? So you've built up this knowledge base. But what is like one of the biggest things that you've seen that tipped you over the edge of believing, right? Because I want evidence, right? I want to see something, and it's always just people saying that they saw something or they knew someone that saw something. So I've yet to see any tangible evidence that like proves aliens or tech that's out there. But I'm curious, like, is there something that really made you go, wow, like, all right, that really proves it to me?
Yeah, I could give you a couple of examples. Now, first of all, Adam, to your point, a lot of it's just people telling stories, and something that unfortunately, a lot of ufologists, to use that term again, because we like that now, we're going to use that more. I do like it actually.
Lean into it.
Yeah, we might as well, right? I mean,
Gotta own it.
But one thing that a lot of ufologists, in my experience, don't do is they don't really scrutinize an individual's testimony enough. I have come to find that a lot of people, first of all, for various reasons, will not tell you the truth. People will lie. People will exaggerate. Then there are people who are telling you the truth, but they will, again, exaggerate. And there are people who are telling you the truth, and it may be the truth that they believe, but they will tend to interpret events that occurred, and they will, project layers of hope and expectation, maybe delusion at times. And sometimes this is what gives rise to UFO narratives. So for me, something that's been really important over the years has been people who can provide photographic or video imagery to support their claims. B, people who are not in a vacuum in the sense that they were just there, by themselves. Echo chamber might be better than vacuum, but anyway, multiple witness sightings is what I'm talking about. And
Phoenix
there were a
Lights.
few cases like that really began to stick out to me. I would say probably beginning about 11 or 12 years ago. I'd always been interested in UFOs, but a gentleman reached out to me. His name was Mike Reese. He's still around. He actually lives about 2 hours from me, and he's a wonderful guy. We've been friends for years. When I started podcasting, I'd been working in radio for many years at that point. And I remember back when we were in radio, I would often go in there and fill in for the weekend hosts because they liked me. They would be like, okay, you know, Micah, he's a producer, you know, and he can go in there and he can run his own board, but he can also run his mouth, you know, take the phone calls during the breaks, and he can host the whole radio show. We don't have to pay a producer to go up there. So when the hosts on the weekends wanted to take time off, they'd send me up there, right? Naturally, I'd get up there into the master studio, you know, in the control room there at 5:70 a.m., open the phone lines and say, we are live. Welcome. It's Saturday night. UFO sightings. I want to hear from you. You know, 1-800-570, and, you know, I'd put the numbers up and people would start calling in and just telling all these incredible stories. There were people who would call in and talk about those big triangles, the massive big black triangles. And I've still got some recordings of some of those calls that are just remarkable. And that was just from people primarily in this region. But after my tenure in radio ended and I started podcasting, Mike Reese, who lives maybe, again, 2 hours from here, he called me and he says, listen, you know, I want to share a story about something I saw in 1973. And he gave the most detailed description of seeing quite literally a disc-shaped object with colored lights around the exterior. Now, what set his case apart was he said, you know, I was driving home with my wife at the time in the front seat with me. My sister was in the back seat and our kids were in the back seat with my sister and they were asleep. And I said, can I meet all your family members? Would they be willing to come out and meet me, along with Mike, of course, and we all have dinner and talk about this? And he said, sure. So my colleagues, Chris and Matt and I, we drove over, we met him, we sat down, and so we're sitting with the whole family. And Mike was really detailed about this. You know, he had worked with the Georgia Department of Transportation at the time. He's a drafter now, or was at the time. And so using, computer-aided drawing, he had actually drawn according to his estimates for the, you know, the size, you know, the rough dimensions of the craft. He had drawn technical imagery of what this thing looked like. His family members all said, yeah, we saw it too. It scared the hell of it out of us. But Mike, of course, now I got to tell you what happened. When they're driving along the Bill Gardner Highway, and there's this light up that at this point they can only see it through the trees. Mike's coming up on this power substation that he knew was up there above, you know, ahead of him on the road to the left. He says, once we get up alongside this power substation, this thing, we could see what was producing the light. It was a disc with these lights, red, green, yellow, red, green, yellow, red, green, yellow around the exterior. It was just hovering but rotating above this power substation. His family says, Mike, what are you doing? He swerves off the road, stops the car, gets out, and starts waving his hands. And I said, what were you thinking? Why would you do that? And he said, you know, at that point, I didn't think these are aliens. I didn't think this was anything other than some sort of experimental craft. And I just wanted to try and get the attention of whoever was up there in that thing. So he gets out of the car, starts waving his arms. Well, this was why his wife and his sister were like, Mike scared the crap out of us. He gets out of the car doing this. And the next day, you know, he said that they watched it for a few minutes. It just kind of drifted off in the direction of the highway. He did contact the local radio stations, television stations, and law enforcement. Law enforcement said, you're crazy, you're drunk, go to sleep. But the TV stations had said that they'd gotten some other reports and didn't know what to do with it. The next day, he ended up getting sick at work. And he thought for some reason that, you know, his exposure maybe to the craft had caused him to, have some sort of a headache. And eventually he actually got sick. He went to the infirmary, he said, and was told that he'd suffered an ocular headache. So that was an interesting case because here again, we had not only this detailed description with the imagery that he provided, not photographs, but again, detailed sketches of, he said, the dimensions, how it looked, what it resembled, but also the family members who saw it with him sat down and spoke with me. There was also another case around that time where a police officer who would not reveal footage that he said he obtained with the dash camera on his police car, but he provided me a photograph of one of these large triangular objects as it was ascending. And what's really peculiar about this, and I still have digital copies of that photograph to this day, is there are two orange objects that you can see in the foreground. And then, of course, the distinctive triangle, which is, you know, really you can tell where the triangle's corners are from greenish light that appears at each of those three tips. but there are these orange objects in the foreground. And he said, what you see there are these two orbs that were hovering near the ground as my partner and I drive up in our police car. He says the orbs begin to ascend. And as I get out of the car to photograph the orbs, he says, I see this great big triangle ascending as the things are moving up toward it. And he got, of several photographs he attempted to take with an actual old film disposable camera he kept in his police car. This was the early 2000s. He got that one photograph. That's another intriguing one to me. And there are similar ones like it. So to me, again, it was around that time getting those kind of reports, seeing some photographic evidence, some technical information, drawings, multiple eyewitness encounters. Nothing clearly said, hey, Earth's being visited by aliens. But what those kind of cases do indicate is that there are some kind of very exotic aerial technologies that have been operating in our skies for decades. We don't know where they're from at this point, right? It would be a leap to assume that these things are extraterrestrial visitors, but that is one hypothesis. But as far as what these things are, I mean, to me, that's secondary to just understanding, okay, how do they work? How long have they been here? What does that represent? Is this something of ours? Is the government as baffled by these things as you guys are and as I am? I still don't know the answers to those questions, but those are the kind of cases that made me start going, yeah, I think there is a there.
I think one of the best examples for me, because I'm kind of skeptical as well as Adam is, like I've not seen any actual evidence that is super compelling, except for a couple cases, like the Phoenix Lights. The Phoenix Lights, another triangular shape object in the sky. A lot of people saw it at the same time, had video evidence of it. It's completely baffling of what that is. So there's definitely something there, but what is it?
Well, the triangle thing goes way back too. So if say that is ours, then we've had some pretty advanced technology for a long time, because not every time, but a lot of the times those the reports of the triangles, and there's the Belgium triangle, that's a famous picture. Mm-hmm. No sound, nothing, but some of them have had sound. It's like, and sound that's affected people. Like, if you look at, but like tons of sightings of the triangles to where, I mean, for a long time, I'm like, this has to be ours. And maybe it's just some advanced whatever, but no confirmation of that yet. To your buddy, Mike was his name, who ran out of his car. Did you tell him the Travis Walton story on how that's not probably a good idea?
Well, yeah, he knew the Travis Walton story.
Oh, he did. Okay.
And the intriguing thing about this is that, of course, Mike's sighting predated the Travis Walton incident.
Okay.
So he knows of Travis Walton now. He, of course, didn't at the time that happened.
Yep.
Now, I've met Travis many times over the years. Travis's story is really interesting.
Yep.
Because depending on which version of it you may have heard, again, bias tends to creep in on that one. And I'll just tell you a couple of interesting anecdotes about Walton there, because I've always liked Walton. I've actually always found him to be very credible. There are people for years who have said, no, he's not credible. This whole thing was a concoction. We can prove that was a fake, and it was, a hoax that he and the other loggers that were there with him were involved with. I got to be honest, and I consider myself more skeptical than the average UFO researcher. I really do. More so than a lot of my colleagues would probably even know. But I have some issues, I will just say, with the skeptical claims about the Walton case being a hoax. Now, it's not a rock solid case. It is not definitive, unimpeachable proof of alien visitation. I'm not sure that Walton necessarily says that it is that either. And although I don't know what it is, I don't believe that it's necessarily a clear hoax like some have tried to argue. Now, all that said, let's look at the case and some interesting data points that I've come across over the years. When Walton had that experience, of course, he was missing for several days. Law enforcement had gone up there to his mother's house. His mother had kind of, told them to go away. Didn't really want to talk to them. His twin brother, of course, had kept saying some unusual things like, I know they're going to bring him back because they don't mean us any harm. He obviously seemed to have a belief about who was the operating, entity behind this phenomenon. He believed that they were from out there. And as it was revealed, the Walton brothers had agreed at one point, look, we're interested in UFOs. If we ever have an opportunity to see one, whoever's closest, we're going to get as close as we can and get a good look at that thing. So to the question of, well, okay, why would he go running out there, step right underneath this thing and look at it, that was the reason why. Supposedly he and his brother had a pact, we're going to do this, right? When he's on board the craft, a lot of people say there are these little gray aliens, right? And that's true. There were these small, again, infantile might have been a term that he used for them. I think another description had been fetus-like, but he said that they were small people. And when he wakes up in that room and he's looking around, he sees these individuals. He's sort of in a state of shock when he sees these little guys. He says it's really kind of muggy and damp inside the room, or whatever this space is that he's in. It seems that he was on board the craft. Backing up just a moment for anyone who hasn't followed this, as we were describing, he and his friends were out there near Snowflake, Arizona, I guess, and they were driving up through this U.S. Forest Service area where they were doing this contract work. They see the craft, which is essentially a disc hovering over this kind of clearing, and they stop to look at it, and Travis jumps out and makes a beeline. He's riding on the back of this truck, a pickup truck that they were using for the job. He runs out there, sees the craft, and he's standing up under it, which is what we were referring to there a moment ago. He's trying to get a good look at this thing. Suddenly, a light shoots out of the bottom. Again, the Hollywood depiction of this is like a beam of light shoots down and lifts him off the ground. Yeah. That seems to be Hollywood. What appears to have happened was that I'm presuming that this craft might have been some kind of an electric spacecraft of some kind, or electric aircraft. But it seems to have grounded, and he was in the unlucky position of being right below the thing when it did this, and he gets knocked back. And I have jokingly with friends over the years, said whoever was on board that craft piloting it, I can imagine what's going through their mind at that point. They're going, oh God, no, don't, oh no, oh, he's down, the idiot's on the ground, oh God.
Well,
we'll bring him up, I guess, get him in the ship, we'll have to fix it.
Get him out of here. No, we can't leave him, So I can imagine the conversation that was going on board the craft. So ultimately it seems that they decided, okay, we can't leave the poor schmuck here, so we're going to go pick him up. And he wakes up again on board the craft. So we resume now that portion of the narrative. He sees these fetus-like small people around him. They don't have hair on their heads, kind of grayish skin, large eyes. And he doesn't think, he reacts. He grabs some sort of object, begins, moving it and trying to get these things out of the way. They leave the room, and he is by himself. And at this point, he leaves the room himself, runs down the hall, has a series of adventures going through doorways and trying to find his way out of this space, when suddenly a man appears. Now, this is the interesting part. It's not a little gray dude. It's a human being, as Travis described it in one of his writings about this over the years, because there were a couple of books about this, the Walton UFO experience, and then there was another one later called Fire in the Sky.
Yep.
Fire in the Sky.
Travis described it as being a person, and he described these people because there was more than one that he would see. He said that they were the epitome of their gender, right? In other words, they looked really good. The dudes were really muscular. The women were pretty attractive, but he didn't see that they were wearing makeup or anything like that. They seemed to have an almost militaristic look about them, and they had uniforms. This man approaches the door. He's got kind of a globe-like helmet of some kind on, and he just gestures to Travis. Travis starts talking. He's going, "Did you see those things down the hallway? Holy hell, get me the hell out of here." And he's like running his mouth. But the guy just kind of gently, moves Travis along out of the room and down the hallway, and he's led off of the craft, led down into a sort of a hangar-like area where he can see this craft and maybe some others. And down a hallway, he enters a small room where there are other people like this man, a woman in particular that's standing there, and he's still talking to these people, very excited. He says none of them speak. They're all just kind of looking at him. And then at one point, they come up, and with gentle pressure, we might say, they sort of push him down onto a table. And initially, he tries to sort of resist. But he says a woman comes over with this, what we would recognize today as resembling an anesthesia mask, right, that you'd use to put somebody down. She comes up, places this over his mouth. He tries to resist, but then he falls asleep. And he wakes up by the side of the road. When he wakes up, he claims that he's not really aware of where he is at that moment. He's a little disoriented, but that as he kind of comes to and he gets up and he's like, "Whoa, man, rough night." He looks up and the thing's hovering right over him. And then he says this craft kind of goes like this and just takes off. So he recognizes the highway where he is, and he realizes he's close to where he had been with the guys, and he walks a few miles, goes down to a gas station where there were some payphones, and he calls. Now, the intriguing part is, for those who have tried to argue this is all just a huge hoax, this guy was just hiding out in a family cottage for weeks. If that had been the case, there wouldn't really be a need if others who had been, with him, the his brother and his coworkers, if they'd been in on this hoax, there wouldn't have been a need to stage a phone call from a payphone in the middle of the night. But the phone company had the records of the phone call being made and received from the payphone that Travis Walton claimed that he had called from, and which his friends went and found him at, where he's sitting there. Now in the film, he's naked. He's been through this ordeal. He's emaciated. Travis had all of his clothing on. He did have beard growth that again, was not consistent with the amount of time that he thought he'd been gone. He thought he'd been gone for hours. And the part about them saying, Travis, dude, you've been gone for like 5 days. That is true. He didn't seem to be aware of that. But the Hollywood version of the film has really, unfortunately, presented this very extraordinary kind of a case where it's like, yep, aliens came and got him. Now, the little fetus-like people are very strange. But again, I think that it's important to emphasize that he also said he saw human beings on board that craft. I'm not trying to argue this was some sort of a secret government, experiment or something like that. But I am saying that there are components of this that are not entirely consistent with the good old-fashioned aliens from space narrative. And so that all brings us to the autumn of 2023. I was in Tempe, Arizona. I was giving a talk at the International UFO Congress. And I'm sorry, this was probably actually 2022. But Travis was there, and one morning, a bunch of us were sitting over there in the hotel restaurant. James Fox is with us, and some of the colleagues of mine. And Travis is sitting there. And the cool thing about Travis is that, unlike me, usually talking it up and everything. Actually, when I can, I love to sit back, be quiet, and just listen. But Travis is very much like that. He's one of the most famous people in the room, and he has the least to say. He's just sitting there being calm, quiet, respectful, just listening to everybody else and what they're talking about. And I love that about him. So I took him aside at one point, and I said, Travis, I got to ask you a question. I said, I've met you many times, known you over the years. When it comes to what happened on board that craft, what do you really think was going on there? Who were they? And do you have any feeling about what the purpose of bringing you on board had been? And when I'm asking him these questions, he's standing there like this, just listening. And when he responds, he says, I have no idea. I've thought about this every day of my life since it happened. And then he goes, their technology, whatever it is, it was so far beyond anything we have. And I thought, maybe I was drugged. It could have been a hallucination. Maybe it was, some sort of a projection, like a hologram that I was seeing. I don't know. But I think about it every day. And he says, I still don't know what that was, who they were. And I found that fascinating because he's not going to these events saying, ladies and gentlemen, I am proof of extraterrestrial visiting Earth.
He isn't.
Yeah. No, he's standing there sane, sober. Guy doesn't drink, as far as I know. And he's standing there always drinking coffee and wearing his suit. And he's just telling me very matter-of-factly off to the side. He has nothing to gain, nothing to win here. I don't know what the hell that was all about. I have no idea. He says, I do events like this because I'm hoping other people who may have had a similar experience will come to me and talk to me, and we can compare notes, and maybe one day we'll be able to figure it out.
I met him at Contact in the Desert 2 years ago when we went, Garrett, 2 or 3. Really nice guy, really grounded, nice dude. He was out there selling his book. And like you said, he would talk to anybody, chat you up, and he didn't have any answers. And I
feel like over the time you'd come up with something. You'd start to embellish it.
I think
he hasn't.
He has ideas about maybe what was going on. I mean, for instance, one thing he will say is it was not an abduction. This idea of alien abduction, he says that does not apply to what happened to me. He says it's clear what happened. I ran out there. This thing blasted me, and they picked me up and they saved my life. He says it was a rescue mission. Think about it. Think about this, though, like this. I mean, I'm not the first person ever to have thought this by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, this is an interesting way to look at this. When a wildlife biologist goes out into the forest and they tag a bear, we got a lot of black bear here in Western North Carolina where I live. And you guys have been to North Carolina because you've been, in fact, you've been right here because you've been to Asheville where I live, which is where the first Cosmic Summit was. Right. And currently it's being held down in Greensboro, but still that's only a couple of hours away. So we have all this beautiful wildlife here in this region. And George Howard knows about that very well as well. And, when a wildlife biologist goes out there and they tag a black bear, in other words, we're not shooting or hurting these things. We're going to tag it and, put a tracking device on its ear or a collar so we can, gauge its movement and see where it goes. we do that because we're trying to learn about these creatures. When we have an animal that's hurt, we may have to go out there and we may have to, tranquilize it. We may have to perform a surgery. Now, how do you think that animal feels? They're like, I was injured and I was out there in the woods and all of a sudden these humanoids surround me. And before I knew it, all of a sudden I pass out. I wake up and there's bright lights all around me and they're doing some sort of weird stuff to my paw. And then they throw me by the side of the road and I wake up and I'm disoriented and I wander off into the woods and guys, here I am. And the other black bears are probably like, yeah, sure, whatever. Right?
Yeah, right.
My point being, there are aspects of what Travis Walton would not call abduction, but again, for lack of any better term, there are aspects of those kinds of claims, the few that I actually find to be credible, because I think there are a lot more people who claim that they've been abducted, and there are other things that might explain those circumstances. But those who are the credible abductees, what they describe does not sound unlike how human biologists would treat animal species that we are trying to help, that we are trying to study, that we're trying to learn about, or maybe learn, about ourselves through studying them. I don't know. That to me makes a lot of sense. If indeed there is a argument to be made that there is some non-human intelligence from off planet and that they are scientists, right? They are interested in what we're doing. Now, this is all hypothetical, but I'm just saying that makes sense to me, right? That's not crazy. And it doesn't seem to promote the sort of threat narrative that a lot of people do these days with the UAP subject. Guys, we could be in deep trouble here. We don't know if these things are hostile or not. Right? You hear a lot of that.
Grush mentions that there are a group of humans that have made contracts or deals with these entities, whatever they may be. And he kind of alludes that it might be like a different dimension, or I don't remember exactly the wording that he chose, but it was very vague, as it usually is.
I think about that briefly. I don't mean to interrupt you, Adam, but
sure.
I think Grush's point had simply been that non-human intelligence is the preferential term because we're not certain.
That's what he used. Yeah,
right. So and that's just to say we're not going to lead with the presumption that we're dealing with extraterrestrial aliens. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned, and I hadn't heard this story that you just told, and the fetus-like creatures, and then there's also the humanoids. Like it makes it. That's why it popped in my head, this thing with Grush, and it's like maybe they were working together. Maybe it's some joint.
Maybe it's like know. Antarctica. Yeah. Maybe it's like Antarctica, and like, all right, I'm just gonna go out there, Micah, if you don't mind.
Go, let's do it. I want to go
deep end.
As below, so above. So I think there might be multiple civilizations, and I love how ufology has moved past just like, is this just aliens? Because like, and this has been brought up forever, but I think there's a much more serious look at it. Like, is it us? Is it multidimensional? Is it a super intelligent shade of the color blue? It could be all of these things. and there's it's like Antarctica. There's maybe some bases underwater here, and they're just observing us, and maybe they're keeping each other in check. Maybe there's some really nice ones. Maybe there's some really bad ones.
Yeah.
Or worse yet, like you mentioned, they tag a bear. That's great. But if what's that disease the deer were getting that makes them go crazy and walk
chronic
in circles?
waste? Is it the chronic wasting?
Yeah.
So if we get chronic wasting, do they go, well, we can't have this spread throughout the galaxy?
Gotta call
them.
No, that's a question, right?
That's dark, I know.
That's still dangerous.
It comes down to the question of what are the motives of the operators, but let's back up for a minute because I like this line of thought. What if we were to go over the hypotheses about what we actually are dealing with? I mean, just really quickly, first there's the idea of extraterrestrial visitation. A lot of people, when they get into studying UFOs, they kind of lead with that presumption. I'm no different. The first UFO book I ever got, I was about 5 years old. It was not a children's book, but my parents allowed me to, have several books because I was wanting to read. And they said, what should we do? Should we give him this stuff? Blemish his mind at an early age. I'm glad they did, because I think that getting a good early head start and having science teachers in elementary school who were like, no, kid, you're not going to talk about UFOs. That's pseudoscience. It challenged me. It pissed me off, but I also grew up to have a good temper of, a balance between skepticism, but also trying to be open-minded. I mean, I really get irked by skeptics who think that just because there is a profound lack of evidence that there is nothing to this phenomenon, even if it only comes down to sociology, that's fascinating. And that's a theory, by the way. So getting to these theories, one is this so-called psychosocial hypothesis. We have this idea that extraterrestrial life could exist. People see things in the skies sometimes, and the imagination puts two and two together and essentially unites disparate instances of, we could call them anomalies, but honestly, an anomaly is only an anomaly if it has not been investigated and an attempt to reconcile it and resolve that phenomenon is not made. But in any case, I mean, most people aren't actually looking at anomalies and trying to say, okay, well, let's look for rocket launches that were occurring at the time. Let's use satellite trackers and find out how many Starlinks we could see in the area of the sky at that time. Let's look at planets. Let's look at blah, blah, blah. Flight Radar 2024 is going to show me how many aircraft were flying and which directions they were going. Most people, when they hear a UFO case, they don't do all that stuff. I'm a geek. I do. Okay. But the presumption that, okay, there's something we can't explain, therefore aliens, that's been with us for a long time. Although when we go back, and that would be the psychosocial hypothesis, it's that people fill in the missing spaces. And that's what humans are good at doing. We have created this sort of narrative, and people hear it and they hear about it and then they're interested in it. And then they go to events and then they start thinking, well, I had this thing happen in 1977 myself. What if I was one of those people too? And then I start finding that there's a community of people who welcome me, and all of a sudden I'm not alone anymore. And now I'm a contactee. Right. And that does happen. But now I don't think that the psychosocial hypothesis necessarily explains all of it. Right. I have seen too many good photographs. I've talked to too many credible witnesses, multiple witness encounters like we were discussing earlier. So what else could it be? Okay. Well, sure, there is the idea that this is a secret government phenomenon, which, by the way, in 1947, when the first UFO sightings were occurring, before we called them UFOs, right, they were still called flying saucers at this point. The leading hypothesis was not, well, man, maybe the Martians have finally arrived. No, at first we were just concerned that Soviet Russia had a super weapon. We were also concerned that they might have actually gotten some German rocket scientists. Some of those guys went to work for them, just like we brought them over to work for us under Operation Paperclip. And we were concerned that the Soviets had a super weapon and that they were using this to surveil the West Coast. Look at where the first, bona fide flying saucer sighting happened. There had actually been sightings of aerial phenomena that vastly predated this. But the first one that made headlines and captured the public's attention was Kenneth Arnold in the summer of 1947. Well, of course, Mount Rainier, Washington, so right up there along the Pacific coast. So the concern had been, what if these Soviet aircraft can fly up along the Bering Sea, come down, and they can surveil the northwestern coast? I mean, they're just barely touching the very corner of the United States, but they're too close for comfort. So that had been the concern. The other hypothesis, of course, as we get into the Blue Book years, and Edward Ruppelt, the first director of Project Blue Book, which is still the longest running systematic UFO investigation within any government agency that we know of, Ruppelt was even saying, we've begun to wonder, could some of these things have belonged to somebody else, some other agency in government, and the Air Force wasn't even aware that these aircraft were being built and flown? He ultimately concluded that was not the case, but then strangely kind of does this about face and seems to become a proponent of the so-called psychosocial hypothesis right before he mysteriously dies at the age of like 37 or 38. Mm-hmm. So it was a really strange situation. Guy didn't live very long, but he lived long enough to do an about face on UFOs. And a lot of people were like, why did he change his position? Had the Air Force come to Mr. Ruppelt and been like, look, Ed, you wrote that really good book about UFOs, and now you've got everybody believing that little men from Mars are visiting. We're going to need you to do a solid here. Be a good American, go out there and tell everybody you don't believe in these things anymore. I don't know if that's really what happened, but this leads us to the other hypothesis, of course, that this might be something of ours, right? A secret government technology that some agency or agencies have, and that we don't know what it is, and we don't know what it is because it is secret technology that's kept within the deepest, darkest black world within, highly compartmentalized special access programs. But then there are those entertaining ideas like, okay, well, what are these things that people see flying out of the oceans? Do we have tech that can transmedium capabilities, that can go into and out of oceans? Again, that was described. We go back though to the Blue Book era. I mean, there were naval officers back in the 50s and 60s describing seeing UFOs coming out of the ocean and going into the water. So do we have that stuff back then? So there's this idea, and Ivan Sanderson was the Scottish zoologist, best known for his study of Sasquatch and the abominable snowman, but he wrote this awesome book called Invisible Residents. And he said, look, what if these things are from somewhere else? And what if they're hiding out there in the oceans? This has become a big topic recently. If you've followed the work of he is a doctor, I believe, actually, but Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet, who had formerly been the director of NOAA, and he was one of those whistleblowers who, of course, had participated in the last congressional hearing. And I've met Rear Admiral Gallaudet, and of course, he's a man who's very dedicated to the cause of disclosure these days, we can say. But that whole fundamental premise of the USOs, these unidentified submerged objects, that's not a new idea. That's been with us for a long time. And there are credible reports that go all the way back to Blue Book. So then the idea is, well, okay, who has that technology? And if it's not ours, and they're out there hiding in the oceans, is this where ET goes and hides if he's visiting Earth? Or do we have something else? There's this fascinating concept that has been revisited over time. John Keel put this idea forward at times. The late Mac Toney's talked about it. More recently, Bernardo Kastrup had talked about it, and he wrote about it in an essay we published there at the Debrief. What if there is a crypto-terrestrial intelligence, a group of people, they may be Earthlings, but somehow they are not like human. A non-human intelligence, but not an extraterrestrial one. And what if they're operating in clandestine fashion right here on Earth? Again, Adam, to your point from earlier, to Adam's point, about Grush saying, well, we don't want to say extraterrestrial. We say non-human intelligence. This is one of the reasons why, because there is this idea that it might be something crypto-terrestrial, or as Keel would have called it, ultra-terrestrial. But I also like this idea too. I mean, the Matrix movies.
Yes.
What if we actually are in a matrix? What if reality is a simulation? And when the operators
strong theories supporting that,
we're all Sims. We're all Sims. And when the operators interface and we interact with them, they appear as anomalous phenomena, not limited to, but including UAP. I mean, and there are other ideas too. Interdimensional phenomena. We could go on down the list, but time travelers, Dr. Michael Masters, my colleague, really supports that idea. And a really creepy thing about the Walton experience is one interpretation of that. How many of you were thinking this already? I want to know. And this is not rhetoric. I want to know. What if the little dudes with the bald heads are future us along with modern day us, and we're working alongside humans from the future? What?
Well, that's been.
I didn't think about them working with us.
One about one of my two theories on the Greys. Well, these are theories I believe in from other people, so they're not mine. Is either the Greys are like 3D printed drones, or they're us. They're us from the future. And I remember seeing a long time ago, like an Inquirer magazine, but in other places, like, this is what a human will look like 10,000 years.
Well,
and it's an alien, basically.
That idea. Now, listen, that idea. Very glad you brought that up, because I believe it was H.G. Wells who talked about the man of the year 1 million or something along those lines. There was a similar. I guess it appeared in one of the old comic books back in the 60s or 70s, and I don't know what it was, but you can find the actual imagery online still of humans throughout time. We went from being apes and being arboreal and basically still semi-quadrupedal to being bipedal. And of course, as we are walking upright and we're using our hands, our brains grow, and so we see the crania grow. The brain has grown, and so if this trend continues, we aren't having to be brutish out there and fighting all the time now. So our bodies from the neck down, that's going to get smaller and smaller and more atrophied over time. But evolutionarily, in proportion to that, our brains will continue to grow. You add into that artificial intelligence, but also its corollary, intelligence amplification, where we're not just creating supercomputer machines, we're actually using brain-computer interfaces to enhance our own innate capabilities. And some have argued that the robot-like, large-headed entities that some claim that they see, that's very in keeping with projections we might make about humans if we survive that long. Or they're drones, like you said, right?
Yeah.
I like the drone idea, because what are we doing right now? We're making robots that are bipedal, that are kind of in our own image. We're 3D printing meat
Yeah.
in different kinds of
Ugh.
things. So just put those things together, jump us 1,000 years in the future, 2,000, 10,000. We've got drone people walking around. And then those are the ones you're going to send across the galaxy light years away. And maybe those societies that made those drones don't even exist anymore. Those could be completely gone because they've been going through space for light years.
Or they're using quantum entanglement and just
Yeah.
using them as RC drones, like in real time. Just
It's
figured
what-
out,
okay.
how to do that.
See,
Why not?
this is why I love these freeform conversations like this, because again, somebody out there is going to see this and they're going to post about it on Twitter and they're going to say, Hanks believes. Well, the truth is, I don't believe any of this stuff. I mean, these are all just possibilities. Again, I'll quote John Keel, who his most famous work was the Mothman Prophecies, and I didn't agree with a lot of his conclusions. But Keel, after writing a lot of the books in his career, also in his older age, got a lot more cynical and skeptical too. And he, at one point, literally, I think it was a statement he either gave to the International Fortean Society or to, it was published in Fate magazine, but he had essentially said that, all that's left for UFOs and study of UFOs is information that probably should be studied by sociologists and maybe a residuum that mathematicians could help with. Something along the lines of, basically, I think that most of this stuff is things that people believe. There's clearly some sort of phenomenon. And in exploring all the possibilities as to what it could be, the attempt is not to try and say, well, we're dealing with all this really crazy stuff that's more like science fiction than any of us realize, and that's our reality. It's simply to acknowledge as a thought experiment, there could be more than we think we know. Now, if I had to try and guess my nearest approximation of here's what UFOs really are, here's what it all means, I would say that all these hypotheses are equally worthy of fair consideration, even if some are less likely than others. But I also would say, too, that we have a very limited perspective. Look at something like time travel. I would say, okay, which is more likely, extraterrestrial visitation or time travel? It's kind of hard to say because interstellar space travel is a really difficult thing to do. Then again, if you can warp space and time and you've got a warp bubble around a spacecraft and you don't actually travel so much as you warp space around your craft and you can traverse interstellar distances very easily, you may not be as encumbered by our limited perspective of chemical rocket travel and how it's like, man, guys, getting from Earth to Mars, hell, getting to the moon's hard. Trying to get to Mars, next to impossible. And, again, a significantly more advanced civilization who has mastered warp drive technology, they're like, are you kidding me? Well, but again, the little Earthlings, they haven't unraveled the mystery of dark matter. Actually, they're still thinking that there's a dark matter. There isn't. We've already tapped into the very ether itself, right? We have harnessed beyond the power of the atom. We are going into the power of 0 point. And they're still out there looking for what's driving the cosmic expansion.
The combustion.
Yeah.
These guys
They're using their hands.
Yeah, they're pouring liquid into a fuel cell and using fire to propel them off of Earth to go to the moon. And then they laugh. I mean,
And they think they're advanced.
Caveman.
Those silly monkeys.
We make fire, we go to the moon.
Yes.
Look at how silly that is when we take ourselves outside the human perspective for 5 seconds and go, wow, maybe we are not the biggest, brightest kids on the block. I have to say, you look at like Elon Musk. I know he's become very controversial and polarizing. He's doing incredible things with SpaceX. But every time Joe Rogan or anybody asks him, what do you think about the possibility that we got some secret tech? What do you think about the possibility that Earth might have been visited? Elon always says the same thing.
Yep.
I think I would know. I know all those defense contractors, so there's no way that this technology exists, right? He says, I've got basically an all-access pass with my clearance. I could get anywhere. And I'm like, but could you? But could you?
I
Yet
like
again.
Elon, but and I'm sure he thinks he's got an all-access pass, but no way. No way.
Something tells me he does
Presidents
not have.
don't have it. Yeah, presidents don't have the
don't have it.
all-access pass. So, you were talking, just real quick, sorry to plug another guy, but I just got it. Richard Dolan's USO book.
Yeah.
So you were just talking about that, like how far back it goes. This one goes up to 1969. So it's all the research on that, and I just got that. Can't wait to read it.
Well, Rich is a good friend of many years, and again, as far as historians who have spent the time digging into these phenomena, Rich and I have different, conclusions about some of this stuff too, as is okay. You don't have to agree with everybody about everything, but I've known Richard for years, and I'm glad you threw that in there because he's an excellent writer and researcher on this topic.
Well, that's why I like you and Richard. You're pretty grounded in this, and we need a lot more of that than I mean, I'm a full believer in free speech and free expression, but there's some whack jobs in the ufology that really muddy the waters, and that's not me saying, that's me saying that. But I think for the most part, we need more Richards and you in this field, so we could just look at it analytically. And I want to believe as much as anybody, and I'm a bigger believer than Adam and Quarterblack here. But I have not seen a UFO. We were talking about the Tic Tac. So I grew up in San Diego, and and everybody I knew, so it was called the pill back then. I knew a bunch of people who had seen it for years and years and years. They'd seen a little white thing that flies around the sky, and you can always dismiss it in San Diego because we have Camp Pendleton to the north, we have the big U.S. Navy base, right, and we had Miramar with Top Gun and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you'd hear sonic booms all the time. But the other thing that coincided with that is we'd always get the mystery booms. And we knew there were mystery booms because the Navy and the military go, no, that was us. That was a sonic boom. It was just a jet, when they asked about it. And they would say, no, it wasn't us. And it wasn't. It was a really weird phenomenon that still happens there all the time. And who knows what it is? There's probably some tectonic thing that we just don't understand. But I felt one, I've heard one, but sometimes it coincided with those little Tic Tacs that were called the pills back then. This is going back to the 80s. This is going like hearing about this. And it's a thing that's known for those old school San Diegans out there. But it sucks that I've never seen one. But it's hard to believe in this big universe that we're alone. There was an article on the debrief that I thought was interesting from, I think it was January, that UC Berkeley was basically sussing out that I don't think you wrote it, but it was basically UC Berkeley and UCLA predict that we might be able to get some sort of alien transmission possibly by 2030 based on Voyager 2, I forgot what the other one was, that are still transmitting, by the way. It could end any day, but they're still out there. Or we're going to get V'ger any day, guys.
V'ger, yeah.
V'ger. And I thought that was fascinating. Now, it's just based on a guess, right? It's based on like how much our transmissions are going out there and how long it would possibly take if one came from that, I'm terrible at memory, Mika, sorry. Some dwarf star out there that we got some signal in 2007 that we might get another one by 2030, and it might be alien. I think that's insane. I think even like people who are legitimate scientists even talking about this is good, because this is something they wouldn't talk about even 20 years ago.
Oh, certainly. If memory serves, again, I'm editor in chief, so I've got to, be the final.
Yeah. I can find the article. There you go.
Yeah, I got to be the final word on everything we publish. So I literally read everything we publish. But I believe that was Chrissy Newton who had been the author of that piece, who has her own. Yes, and she has her own program, of course, on Discovery that she appears in, and she's well known, for her interest in this phenomenon, even beyond television and her writing at the debrief. But we're lucky to have her on our team. That piece, again, was essentially based on a science paper where it was just mathematical extrapolations. They were saying, hey, look, if indeed there are other intelligences out there, and the likely places where they may be positioned throughout the universe are here, and here, and here's how long it would take for a radio signal to propagate from any of those locations. As a benchmark for research, they were essentially saying, within the next X amount of years, we could hypothetically be seeing not only evidence of communication, but it might come from one of these areas. Now, I guess the issue there is it's still kind of following the old model of SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where we're using radio signals to try and communicate with the stars. And usually it's a very passive kind of a thing in the sense that we've got radio dishes, radio telescopes rather, and we're trying to search for signals that are coming through a narrow band of transmission, sort of a window that we call the cosmic watering hole. And we're looking to see if we can collect information through that very, very narrow window. have long, and I've spoken with Dr. Shostak, who of course is the head at the SETI Institute, which is no longer government funded; it's now a private organization. And it's interesting that Dr. Shostak has often been very dismissive of UFOs, and he's always tried to take a very hardline science position on that subject. But he's also gotten behind Avi Loeb. And I believe that Dr. Shostak is on the board of the Galileo project. And Shostak says, look, I have my reservations about the idea of UFOs and things, but he says when it comes to searching for extraterrestrial life, I'm going to put my money behind Avi. Now, Avi really thinks there are things flying around, gadgets, as he calls them, flying around in near Earth orbit, a little further out throughout our solar system, maybe even in our atmosphere. I obviously think there are things flying in our atmosphere. Avi does too. Seth, while he has reservations, he still says, I support Avi's work. And I think I know why, and really not to quote him, but just to essentially distill this down to its finest essence. When SETI began, right, and they first started looking for radio signals from the stars, and they're still doing that. But that was a really fringe idea. A lot of members of Congress, and again, this going back to when there was some government funding for this, they were like, we're not going to waste taxpayer dollars on y'all looking for little green men, right? And it was considered really silly that there were scientists looking for messages from the stars. Let's not worry about what's going on out there. We got to worry about what's happening right here. And that was the general, idea.
You got plenty of places to waste your money. All right.
Yeah.
Watch, we'll do it.
And we'll do it. We're real good at that.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
That was the issue. I think that Seth now, of course, after many decades of unsuccessful searches for extraterrestrial signals, he's saying, okay, if Avi Loeb can use all these, sensory arrays, this suite of technologies to try and search maybe closer to Earth, maybe within our atmosphere, we won't know unless we look. And maybe it would be incumbent upon us as scientists to actually look rather than to presume that there's nothing there. And I liked that even though he has often been antagonistic toward the UFO, I don't want to say believers, but proponents. I'm a proponent, a proponent of science being applied toward this subject. I was heartened when I spoke with Shostak that he supports Avi because it's kind of coming full circle. He was the fringe kid. Now he's the guy who's saying, all this UFO nonsense. But I remember what it was like to be considered the fringe guy nobody believed in Congress wouldn't fund. And now here's Avi Loeb without any congressional funding or government funds, but people who believe in, hey, the idea that maybe there could be stuff out there we don't know about. So let's put some money behind this guy and his team of scientists, and let's see if they can figure this out. I'm glad that Shostak supports him. And again, there's so much animosity in this community. Again, it's fine to be a little skeptical, but there is a point beyond which you get to the point of being just purely cynical or just, you're just a, can I say asshole on this?
Yes.
In this live stream?
Oh,
Okay.
God, yeah.
So you can be an asshole. Anyway, there are a lot of assholes out there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of them. And I don't think that science needs more of those. I think that science needs, hey, look, you know what? We don't have to lead with the presumption, but we don't know if we never go and look. Let's go look.
Yeah. We need adventurers.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take,
Exactly.
Also, SETI, I don't know if they still do this. They might still do this. They did that screensaver. This is like 20 years ago. So you signed up for the SETI screensaver, and then they would use a little bit of your computer power to map and look.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was the thing. I signed up.
Early crowdsourcing, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Back
blockchain.
And Seth Shostak, like I saw him at Contact in the Desert, and he was giving everybody but he was nice. Like he's like friendly with everybody, but he didn't believe anybody.
Well, he was at Contact in the Desert.
Yeah.
That's the important thing.
Yeah.
Shostak would go on the shirt you're wearing right there. He would go on Art Bell's radio show, right? The Late Great. I loved Art Bell. Art was. I never was able to be on Coast to Coast when Art was the host. That's one thing I'll always regret, despite always enjoying going on there with George, and when Jimmy Church was a co-host or fill-in host, rather, and of course all the other wonderful people, Ian Punnett, who passed away,
R.I.P.
Richard Sirrett, but Art, never got to talk to him. But the point being, again, Seth Shostak would always go on the show with Art and talk, because he also knew that as a scientist, he had a certain degree, a certain obligation to say, hey, Art has a large listenership, and these people are interested in aliens, and so am I. And we may not all share the same perspectives on that, but I think it would be important for me to go talk to them about this as a scientist, right? We need more scientists who'll do that.
Yep. Absolutely. And like, especially now, like right now, like in ufology, it's not good. I wish it was better. But the iron is hot, and we're going to get something else will happen. It usually, it's usually a big thing every few years, but we're a little overdue now. And I think people were certainly expecting stuff from the hearings way more than what we got, but who knows? I want to talk about the weirdest thing of all this. Skinwalker Ranch is the coolest place. Just the idea of it. I don't know what to believe about it, but it's like a ghost story, a monster horror film, and a science fiction story all crammed into one on one little ranch. And I'm obsessed with that damn show, Micah. So, and I was obsessed with it before the show. It was always the coolest. I'm like, man, this shit sounds wild. All right. Smoking dogs in trench coats and creatures coming out of portals and something that looks like a floating Winnebago and maybe a dire wolf, like a zombie dire wolf. I'm like, that sounds cool as hell. I don't know if any of it's true, but what the hell? Let's go. So you just got to visit there. What are your thoughts on Skinwalker Ranch?
Okay, my thoughts, and then we'll get into some of the history.
Yeah.
My thoughts are that finally having made it there and been on site, I mean, it reminds me a lot of other areas of the Uinta Basin there in northeastern Utah that I visited. My experience there was really nice. It was hot, but the weather was nice. The vibe was happy, and I came away with a very good experience, having spent the hour or so that I was there, which is not what most people would expect. And the only way I can imagine that my experience was so different, first of all, I didn't spend, months or years out there camping at night with sensor arrays and cameras and trying to study stuff. I was
rockets.
And rockets. Yeah, exactly. I saw where they launched those because the gentleman who, of course, was leading the tour while I was there, and I refer to myself as a paranormal tourist in that regard because I was there and I was out. Dr. Travis Taylor, who's a dear friend of mine, he took me out there, and this was while we were out at Phenomicon, the event that they hold out there each year in Vernal, Utah. And in between, he was late getting back for his panel discussion, but in between engagements that day, he drove all the way out there to give us a quick tour. And so I'm at Skinwalker Ranch, and how this all came together, I was running errands with my brother and his wife earlier that day. Our reason for being there at Phenomicon was rather interesting. And this is quite a story. This is really bizarre, but so long story short, Dr. Travis Taylor and I and my brother and Jay Stratton, the former director of the UAP task force, and our friends Jim and John, we're all in a band called Hitchhiker. We're all yeah.
Awesome.
We
wasn't expecting that, but
yes.
That's awesome.
We're in a band, and I play guitar, and Travis sings, and also Travis is a great guitar player. Jay Stratton also plays guitar. A lot of people think that's really weird. I don't, and I'll tell you why. Because throughout my whole life, and maybe people who are not musicians would think this was weird, but my whole life, one of the great ways you connect with people is through music, right? 100%. And you look at great polymaths throughout history, from Da Vinci to Saint Germain, and others. I mean, some of the greatest minds throughout history were multi-talented. They were people who were artists and mathematicians and scientists and musicians. And so in my experience, a lot of the most interesting people I've met in my life, they might have worked in the government, they might be technicians or rocket scientists, but they like music. Everybody likes music. Everybody sings out of key on their way to work or to school or wherever, or to, in the mornings, dropping their kids off at school, at high volume while the radio's playing. So long story short, when I, as a journalist, first met Jay Stratton, who was the former director of the UAP task force, it was at an aerospace conference in Huntsville, Alabama, and that first initial meeting went something like this. This is off the record. I hope at some point in the future, maybe you can come on the record and we can talk about your experience in government. And then we talk for an hour, right? Fast forward a couple of years. Jay wasn't able to attend that same conference, but we'd, kept in communication, built up a bit of a rapport. And he said, listen, I can't come to the conference, but I want to have a few people over to, and the reason he couldn't attend the conference was because a company he was working for, Radiance Technologies at that time, they just didn't want people attending this event. At that time, Travis Taylor also worked for that company, and they both, again, working in Huntsville, Alabama. So he just said, we're going to have some people over. And by the way, Travis likes to play guitar. So if you have a guitar and you want to bring it along, just, bring a guitar. And I said, cool, great. Again, this happens a lot at like work retreats and events and things. People after hours, they're playing guitar. So here are all these, former government, investigators who had looked into UAP, government contractors, et cetera, and we're playing guitar. And Travis puts forward this idea. He says, hey guys, I got a great idea, man. I bet if we put a band together and took it out there to Phenomicon in Vernal, people would love to see us all like playing together. Cause we've got a journalist, and, I'm the dude from Skinwalker Ranch, and, Jay, of course, led the UAP investigations under the task force. And I'm like, yeah, sure, Travis. That sounds great. Whatever, didn't think it would come to fruition.
A power group.
I get it.
First album, The Mesa.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
but, I mean,
See it now.
it was the most bizarre thing, because how often if you got any of you all are musicians talk about, oh yeah, we should do something all the time. I see that. Is that a Martin? Is that a Martin guitar behind you,
Yeah, it
Adam?
is. Yeah, Street Master. Yeah.
I play a Martin as well when I'm not
Nice.
playing electric. But long story short, again, I'm like, yeah, sure, okay, that sounds great. And then I get a text from Travis weeks later, and he says, hey man, I'm serious. Can you come out to Phenomicon and do this event? So we had one rehearsal. It was a charity thing where they gave away a guitar for, I think the charity was for kidney disease. And we just got up there and played music. I mean, I covered my expense to get out there and all that. We weren't paid to do that. I just go out there to jam with the guys for a good cause. But while we're out there, I'm running errands with my brother and his wife. My brother Caleb plays drums in the band. We're running errands earlier that day, and I get a message from Stratton. He says, we're headed to the ranch. He says, can you get here in like 10 minutes back to the place where they are at the event? And I'm like, yeah, I can be there. So we haul ass back down to the place. My brother and his wife and I jump into the car with Jay Stratton and his wife and their son, John, and we drive out to Skinwalker Ranch. We get there, and then sure enough, the red Jeep comes barreling ass down the road with a dust cloud behind it. And here comes Travis Taylor. Hey man, he pulls up, and he's got Nick Pope, and he's got William Henry with him. And he just gives us a quick tour of the ranch. And so my feeling there was really positive. And I'm like, I think for me personally, I didn't experience anything unusual there. But for me, Skinwalker Ranch is like a Rorschach test. We all went in there with people that we all like each other, and we had a very nice, the vibe was high, and our experience was good. But I think for other people there at night with science instruments and stories of dire wolves and things running around, their experience might be very different, right?
Yeah.
And for them, the ink blot test might not show butterflies and pretty weather, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just to say that my experience was very positive, and why it was a good experience does not say that there's not people who have had weird experiences. Talking with Jacques Vallée just a couple of weeks ago, mentioned, Jay Stratton took me out there to the ranch for the first time, and Jacques responded and he said, Skinwalker Ranch is a very dangerous place.
Yeah.
And if you read his recent diary and you look at some of the reports that he was investigating personally there in the Uinta Basin, in his diaries, and I'm referring to what he writes in Forbidden Science 6, Vallée had gone and he was investigating with Frank Salisbury, who had written that book, The Utah UFO Display, and also a science teacher who had worked with Salisbury named Junior Hicks. Now, look, I've interviewed some of Hicks' former students who had seen UFOs in the Uinta Basin as well. I've reviewed some of the documents that the National Institute for Discovery Science had produced back when Bigelow's initial pre-OSAP investigation was going on with NIDS. I've interviewed Colum Kelleher, Jacques Vallée. I know Jay Stratton obviously very well, and I've talked with a lot of people who had been involved in that effort. Many of them, Eric Davis and others, will tell you, we all saw these orbs of light out there. Colum said that it was interesting that after the NIDS years, none of the people who had worked on NIDS under the original Bigelow thing, he said none of them saw these, spectral sorts of manifestations, the so-called hitchhikers. And yes, that's why the band with Travis and Jay is called Hitchhiker.
Yep.
And they will tell you, they say the hitchhiker effect is real. I haven't personally experienced that, but they say, we had more than our fair share of experiences with that. But Colum had said it it was interesting because more of the military personnel who would come to the ranch seemed to have those experiences than the old NIDS team, who were the scientists looking at it. And he said, I don't know why that is. But some fascinating hypotheses came out of what was going on there. And again, a lot of people were like, they think that, you look at how the skeptics phrase this, poltergeists, space phantoms, this silly nonsense.
Yeah.
The way that they write this, they're just trying to make it sound crazy. At one point in Vallet's journals, Vallet essentially says, Kelleher put forward an idea of what he thinks is going on. And he said, what if there is some kind of intelligence here? And there was always, based on all these people who have written about it, and of course also having talked with some of them myself, there's always been some division on whether they think there's just people, right? Some sort of a government operation or something that's like targeting the ranch or has an interest in it in some capacity, or if it's just a mind virus kind of a thing. And exploring that idea a little bit, the NIDS team had looked so far as to see if there were hallucinogenics or things like that on the property that could have given rise to hallucinations and altered states of consciousness. But at one point, as Vallet is describing some of this in his book, he's saying Kelleher puts forward the idea that what if the intelligence that we perceive to be operating at Skinwalker Ranch, if there is one and whatever it is, what if it's some kind of artificial intelligence and it's not of earthly origin? And it interfaces with us, and there are, like any kind of computer program, there are glitches occasionally. And when there's a glitch in that program, we perceive that as the anomalies, like a UAP or a phantom or something, right? These things aren't so much real as they are literal glitches in the matrix. And whatever we are experiencing at the ranch is the glitch emanating from the AI that's operating and interacting with us. And I'm like, this is, to me, extremely fascinating and intellectually rewarding to explore wherever you sit on what's actually happening out there. But again, for people to try and just do it the disservice of saying they believe there are werewolves and poltergeists and aliens out there, I mean, that's not really what a lot of the people who have been there at the ranch actually think. And personally, I would be fine with the idea that maybe there is less going on at Skinwalker Ranch than popular mythology seems to convey. But it's an intriguing little area that, for whatever reason, when people come together and they spend time there, it's this strange nexus for all this weirdness, right? And I'm personally just fascinated with that.
Yeah.
There seems to be some kind of geomagnetic anomalies there, because when they try and blanket map it, it's all over the place. The trajectories of the rockets get messed up, and technology stops working sometimes. So there definitely seems to be something geological there.
And that could, I don't know, that could be something that messes with our head a little bit.
Maybe,
you know?
yeah.
We don't know. We don't know how the sun affects us. So
you look at that research that Michael Persinger did. I believe he passed away, but so the late Michael Persinger, but he was, looking at how exposure to various, forms of electromagnetic radiation affect human perception.
Exactly,
and the idea that geological phenomena, again, tectonic stress that gives rise to plasma manifestations,
or man-made 5G,
or yes, exactly, yes, because there do seem to be the interceptions of specific frequencies in that gigahertz range. Which, keep in mind, a lot of people act like that's nonsense because they've talked about that occurring at Skinwalker Ranch. And again, Travis and I have talked about, and he acknowledges that the same frequency that they've detected, I think, is the same thing that satellite phones use. So he's aware of that. But Arrow, in the first official UAP report that came out under the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, they also point to interesting frequencies, ranges of frequencies that appear to, where emissions appear to emanate from UAP that fall within these frequency ranges that are not only detectable, but are also repeatable. And that in some of they can't talk about all the signals intelligence and the technologies they use to collect this information, but they certainly describe in the reports, again, government reports. And these are the highly, filtered versions that were not the ones that were shown to lawmakers in classified briefings. These are the public versions that, we regular civilian types get to see, right? But in those reports, they describe frequency ranges that are detected in these emissions produced by UAP, radio frequencies and other things, that seem to I don't know what that suggests. I mean, are these emissions a byproduct of technologies that these craft use for propulsion? Because again, keep in mind there doesn't appear to be any kind of thermal signature with a lot of these UAP that can be associated with any kind of a combustion, any kind of a normal
The
propulsion
ether, man,
system.
0 point energy. Said it earlier.
It sure seems like they are using some kind of, again, for lack of a better term, anti-gravitic kind of technology. But again, are the frequencies and things that are detectable in proximity to UAP, are those a byproduct of how they operate, or is that evidence of some kind of a transmission for communication? I don't know. So but I think it's interesting, and certainly the fact that there's a certain parallel between the interception of frequencies and things that they describe at the Skinwalker Ranch property out there that seems to overlap with some of the UAP investigations by Arrow. I mean, that's notable to me.
Mm-hmm. No, that's such a deep discussion on that, just expanding on that. Cause when you were talking to Jacques Vallée, and I'm going to paraphrase as somebody who is dumb. Okay. I'm a dumb person, but he was talking about like how Americans approach ufology, right? And we look at it technology based, and we're looking at it very almost 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional based. And he was basically saying, this is not something we can repeat. This is not something we can repeat. And this is like in Jeremy Corbell's first Skinwalker documentary, they were talking about this too. It's like we'd see stuff, but we never see it again twice.
Yeah.
And it might be based on our perception, like what you were talking about before. Like both of us can be sitting here and we're going to see two different things, or one person's not going to experience something at all. And it was such the takeaway from that documentary basically was there's something happening here. We have no idea what it is. It could be far weirder than we have any concept of, but we are no closer to figuring out than we were when we got here,
Well, yeah.
And I love Jacques Vallée was basically, with ufology and other research. I will expand this to other research, basically saying, we're basically, he said, a lower life form. We are a lower life form trying to understand this from life forms that are so far advanced from us. If they're out there, that it's good, it's almost going to be impossible for us to figure this out because, we might be just an ant farm. We don't know. We have no idea.
Alien ant farm. Now, there's
alien ant farm.
There's a hypothesis we forgot ee're that we are, even though that kind of falls under the extraterrestrial umbrella, but still, I mean, the idea that we are, we're the pets. This is the zoo, right?
Yeah, Truman Show. It's we're a zoo.
Yeah. Maybe so. But you got to go to Skinwalker. That's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
I hope
You'll
to
go
back
one day.
I know we're going to be back out there in Vernal again this year. It was just confirmed by Doc Taylor the other day, and in fact, I'm going to see Travis and Jay and everybody here in the weeks ahead. But I hope to go back to Skinwalker, and as a person who studied UFOs for years before I became a journalist, and these days I'm primarily a science journalist, and yes, we do report on UFOs occasionally at the debrief, but I mean the vast majority of what we cover is physics and astronomy, defense, things like that.
I love it.
It's a great resource. Yeah.
Well, we try to, the whole idea since day one had been, if and when there's UFO news, report on that and treat it as seriously as any of these other issues, but not to the exclusion of these other issues. I mean, some of the advancements that we're seeing in space and artificial intelligence, and there's so many areas of technology that are expanding so significantly right now. Like, for instance, we had this fascinating thing the other day where Boom Aerospace, they are a civilian company who is working right now on creating noiseless supersonic travel, and NASA's doing the same thing too. They're working on with their so-called Quest program, and it's kind of a combined effort where we got NASA, but also civilian groups who are like not so much in a race, because Boom and NASA are working together, and how they worked together specifically was really fascinating to me, because Boom was doing a test of their new, I think the XB-1 is the name that they have for it, which is their experimental space plane. It's not a space plane, I'm sorry, it's a supersonic aircraft, and it's a civilian aircraft. But this thing was flying, they were doing a test with it, and there's this image, there's the Quest mission that NASA's got going on. But NASA engineers came out to help Boom when they were doing the test of their supersonic aircraft. And the idea was they wanted to have the aircraft flying at an altitude where it reaches, basically, there's a phenomenon called Mach cutoff, where when a supersonic aircraft is traveling at a certain altitude and under the right conditions, propagation of the sonic boom when the sound barrier is broken actually gets cut off and the sound does not reach the ground. So it's not real silent supersonic flight, but on the ground, you don't hear a sonic boom when the sound barrier is broken. At the moment that this thing is flying overhead during these experiments, and the moment that it is between a camera being operated by NASA personnel on the ground during these tests and the sun directly overhead, at the minute that their experimental aircraft was between them, these NASA engineers had a sophisticated camera setup called a Schlieren image or Schlieren photography setup. I've actually, in the past, done some experiments with Schlieren photography myself. But it essentially is just a very unique kind of a imaging system where you can see air disturbance in silhouette when you're photographing things. Long story short, they were able to get photographs of the thing breaking the sound barrier at the exact moment as it passes in front of the sun, and there's no sonic boom audible on the ground. Now, why is this significant? This has nothing to do with UFOs. But a lot of people have pointed out, it's like, well, but these UFOs, they say that these things can move so quick. Bam, right? There's a Schlieren system. Thank you for the visual. Yeah, this is how this works. And if these UFOs move so quickly, people are like, how in the world could they move so fast and not make a sonic boom? I think Avi Loeb and others have even asked this question. They're like, these things couldn't be moving that fast. We'd be hearing sonic booms. Well, we just had a technology demonstration the other day where we had supersonic flight with no discernible sonic boom, because there's the image. There we go.
Nice.
So you can see there's the Schlieren image of their experimental aircraft breaking the sound barrier.
Wow, that's
pretty
cool, huh?
cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
There was no sonic boom on the ground, and I'm thinking, for years we've heard about UFOs that seemingly exceed the sound barrier, traveling at supersonic speeds, and no sonic boom. We are now developing aircraft designed, they still produce that noise, but it's not audible on the ground. Is it possible we are barely now getting to the point where we are creating technologies that somebody else has already had for decades, maybe centuries, if we want to go far enough back, right? Yeah.
I mean, this is still using technology, the advancing technology that we have already, right?
Yeah.
Didn't they just produce? I don't know who they is. I don't remember the lab that did this, but they created a warp bubble, right? Humans created their first warp bubble recently.
Yeah,
and that's the beginning of a whole different genre of not having a sonic boom, because nothing happens, because it just is existing inside of this warp bubble.
I think that so basically it was a mathematical model that accounted for the warp bubble. The actual construction of one that could be physically used, we're still a ways away from that. But but there are a couple of people, groups rather, who are working on this, and one of them is Applied Physics, which is a think tank of physicists who essentially are saying, let's look at things and let's see if we can come up with some unique and novel approaches, write some science papers about this, and then we'll see if we can get government funding, and then we can help people develop some novel technologies. And they're very interested in warp bubble technology. Now, interestingly, this company, Applied Physics, they reached out to one of our excellent writers there at the Debrief, Christopher Plain, and they said, hey, we got an idea. We want to produce a paper and produce some math about a UFO case for you guys, and let the Debrief interview us, and you can write an article about this. But we're intrigued by the famous O'Hare incident that I guess was that 2007. I may have to go to the Googles here, but the Chicago O'Hare UFO incident. Basically, what happened, and if you know about this case, it was a sort of it was not, to me, an extraordinary incident among UFO cases, right? It was some people who worked at Chicago O'Hare over, I think, Gate C-17. They're looking up and they see some sort of an object in the sky, and it's hovering there for a second, and then the thing shoots straight up through the clouds. Now, again, that is, of course, remarkable, but I mean, the reason I say, as far as UFO sightings, that one's sort of run of the mill is if you look at the broad history of UFOs and descriptions of UAP and things, I mean, a little object hovering below the clouds and then shooting up. I mean, you'd think that's pretty run of the mill. What's significant about it, it was 2006, by the way, is that there were multiple United Airlines personnel who said that they saw this thing. The FAA initially said that there was no sighting, but eventually they had to, admit through, I think, FOIA requests that were filed, I believe by John Hilkovich, who was a transportation writer for the Chicago Tribune, I believe at the time. He had filed FOIA requests and tried to look into this case. And ultimately what they found was that a lot of people said that they'd seen this. The FAA did have some records of communication about it. And essentially how it was described, and see, this article is basically talking about the same thing. I believe that's probably a Daily Mail rewrite of what we did.
Yeah.
But Matthew Phelan, that writer, is a good friend of mine. He's a great guy. But the physicists at Applied Physics said, based on how that thing behaved, like the little disc shooting up into the clouds, they said, if an aircraft or spacecraft of any kind had a warp bubble, as we understand the mathematics and the physics of that to work, exactly what they described happening, which was that when it shot up through the clouds, it left a hole, right? And that can happen naturally. There is such a thing called a hole punch cloud, believe it or not.
Mhm, there is.
Yeah. But they said that if indeed a physical object with this sort of exterior field had moved through that cloud and displaced the cloud around it, it would have created unnaturally this hole punch cloud. There's our article on it, Chris and I did. And that could have accounted for what was observed that day. So in essence, they're saying we're looking at a classic, now a modern classic UFO sighting. And we're trying to apply physics toward that and saying, okay, if that thing did what those people said, how did that technology work? And their general premise is that's consistent with how we think a warp bubble would actually work. Isn't that fascinating?
That's crazy.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's a crazy. God, that was such a good case too.
Yeah.
From when that happened.
And again, I'm not downplaying it when I say that it's run of the mill. I'm just saying, I mean, people get a few seconds looking at a saucer. There are lots of really good UFO cases. But in this one, where comparatively we actually had very little data, that we've got scientists who are now trying to extrapolate information about, okay, well, then how did that damn thing work? That's very promising to me.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, let's get to the audience.
I can't believe he was in a band with Travis Taylor. Like that's so
That's fucking awesome.
A power
listen to the
band.
Called the
music? Do you guys have
Hitchhikers.
music online somewhere?
So we primarily play covers, but so there is some original material that's being written. We got a couple of songs right now, but it's a matter of getting everybody together and learning that material.
So great though.
Oh
and
yeah,
again, that was all just a happy accident. But honestly, to me, being able to speak the language of music with people like Travis and Jay and others and John and Jim, my brother and I have played music together for years. I was a professional musician for years. You put that okay, here's some footage. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Here's some footage of us rocking out.
That's awesome.
That's great.
You got Travis on vocals, my brother rocking out back there on the Pagan Skins. There's Jay Stratton playing guitar over there. Look at Jay looking cool playing guitar. Jim,
Oh wow.
Damn.
Jim Kilgard,
great.
our keyboard player and backup vocalist behind him, and of course Travis doing lead singing right there. But fun fact, that Stratocaster with that Floyd Rose, I actually built that guitar.
No way.
Really?
For that event. Yeah, because I wanted a
Dope.
very versatile guitar because I had to travel out there on a plane. We didn't have amps and stuff. We ended up having effects processors running straight into the PA. But that Strat right there, I built based on Jim Marr's original Motley Crue. Here we go. Original
Nice.
Motley Crue prototype. So it's loaded with Seymour Duncan humbuckers, a Floyd
Nice
Rose.
crowd.
The crowd seemed to enjoy it,
Hell yeah.
And last but not least, the classic, the vintage, oversized.
Dragon.
Yeah, well, I was going to say
Right.
oversized headstock, but
Yeah. And
Sorry, I'm going.
Oh
super-
yeah, dude.
I'm
You're
going
getting nerdy on
guitar
the
geek right now. So
guitar
yeah.
stuff.
Oh,
Nice.
that's good. There was a
We need to
Misfits
do more
t-shirt.
work.
There was a Misfits
Yeah.
t-shirt in there too. One of my all-time favorite bands.
Oh yeah,
Love the
yeah. Oh
Misfits.
well, the podcasters they had a fit because we didn't tell anybody we were going to do this. It was billed at the event, but when the video, somebody was live streaming it from the event, and when that got up on Twitter, Joe Murgia, UFO Joe, he shared the live stream. and people were going nuts. I mean, they're
Oh,
like,
that's
hold
awesome.
on. They're like, who's in this band? Hold on. Travis Taylor, Jay Stratton, Micah Hanks, the guy, the editor, like the journalist at the debrief. What?
You guys should tour. Let's
They
go.
come
You
in
guys
to-
need a
that's right.
channel so we can watch all these.
Yeah, right. And I got to give a call out to the Brothers of the Snake and their excellent podcast. Who
Oh yeah.
Oh, love
their
them.
band, their band
You got a
performed
band
at
too?
Cosmic. Yeah, their band performed at Cosmic Summit last year, and it was awesome. That was
Yeah.
so much fun. So there are a lot of great musicians and multi-talented people in this community. That's for sure.
And Ben Van Kirkland on the bongos.
And Randall
Yeah.
Carlson.
Yeah, and Randall
got up and
Carlson,
played on
yeah.
one. Yeah.
No, they're legit. Yeah,
Well, see, I don't think they know. I think the brothers might know that I play guitar, but a lot of I don't mix and match all that much. But now that the Hitchhiker videos are out, I suspect more people are going to be like, "Hey, Micah, bring a guitar.
Yeah.
You gonna bring a
That's
guitar to
jam.
Cosmic Summit?"
Yeah.
Can you?
Make it happen.
I'd love to.
Please.
Yeah.
It sucks. The Snake Brothers aren't going to go. Well, they might go. I think we just talked to them a couple weeks ago, and they said we're going to try, but we have another trip going on, and they
I
have
love them.
they have
yeah.
their whole winery thing and other lives.
Yeah, exactly.
They're
To
in my
my-
neck of the woods. So
That's the whole thing. That they have multiple enterprises going on, and I'm the same way. I mean, again, I can't stay still for very long, but although it saddens me to know that they may not be there, if then I know that there won't be an excellent band performing again, and they are really really good.
well, you should play.
I might have to bring a guitar then.
There you go.
At very
Oh,
least,
yeah.
the least I could do. But they were so awesome last year. That was a high point for me was when they performed. It was really good.
I'll bring my bass. Let's go.
Let's do
Do
it.
this. Let's do
Oh,
this.
jam session. Here we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Melodic. I can't read. Melodic Method has become a member. Thank you. And that's WG. Thanks for all the memberships there. I saw that. Buster Nut Smash for $20 says, I'm sticking to my guns on the UFOs are holdovers from an earlier ancient civilization that lived below ground on or in our oceans. Silurians, man. There is no proof that they come from outer space, and they've been seen for thousands of years. And there is no proof that they come from outer
like
space.
that theory.
You're not wrong there.
That's true.
You're not wrong. Just because they're in the sky doesn't mean that's where they come from. So there you go.
That's a very important point.
John Kennedy for $5. Greer was on Alex Jones the other day. I'll have to check it out. We're checking out when you can see it. Said some pretty interesting stuff. He usually does. Greer is not boring. I'm going to give him that. Greer is not boring.
Agreed.
North of the Rockies for $10. Which UFO book inspired you the most to take an interest in the subject? Mine was Operation Trojan Horse by John Keel.
Oh, that's a great question. That's an excellent book too. There's some really interesting stuff in that book. And Keel's whole, again, I think that people maybe unfairly, because Keel used these terms himself, but maybe unfairly they sort of just summarize that whole premise of that book and say Keel was a demonologist. And so that leads some who have not read that book to say, well, Keel thought that these phenomena were devilish, demonic entities, which is really kind of in line with the same sort of space poltergeist nonsense we hear about Skinwalker Ranch. And again, it's to me skeptics who are intentionally trying to produce nonsensical and absurd distillations of what's really being said. But if you read Operation Trojan Horse, what Keel is really saying is a lot of these UAP behave in ways that are anything but evidence of extraterrestrials. And that was the first book that really is sort of introducing his ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. But the demonological component is simply this. He said, throughout history, people have described, jinn, angels, ghosts, fairies, and the fae, et cetera, et cetera. I think UAP, and they were still UFOs back in those days, but he was saying that I think that these aerial phenomena are more akin to those traditional beliefs from around the world where people encounter others, non-human intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And that's why John Keel and what he outlines in that book was actually really, I think it was frowned upon by the real mainstream UFO researchers at that time. But again, right around that same time that book was written, Vallée had gotten pretty put out with the University of Colorado project, goes back to France and says, we're going back to square one because the U.S. and their nuts and bolts attitude ain't getting us anywhere. And he starts going back through the history books and says, whatever these phenomena are, people have seen them for a long time. And this is what gives rise to the book Passport to Magonia. So that would be a book that it wasn't the first one to answer North of the Rockies question. Excellent coast-to-coast reference, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't the earliest. But again, Magonia was one of those books that for many people, and Operation Trojan Horse too, where those who were paying attention began to realize, call it demonology or whatever you want, but what they're trying to say is maybe UAP represents something from Earth. And maybe we are really getting ahead of ourselves saying these are little green men from outer space.
Good point. Josh Kelsey has dropped $20. That's what he does. He drops it, walks away. Thanks, Josh. Black Snape. That's our video for tomorrow, by the way, on Nerdrotic. Got a lot to say about that. Gary, how do we get a signed copy of your book? Oh, well, news on that tomorrow. I think tomorrow. No, day after tomorrow. But I'll give you some news on that. But you will be able to get a signed copy of our book, of my book. Simon Ho for 5 Canadian pesos. We are an alien/ape hybrid experiment, which explains the diversity. Aliens now can no longer reproduce, so they're using our fertility to procreate. That's one of the theories.
Yeah.
That's one of the
I was
theories.
going to say, to quote Nick Pope,
Zorbu.
interesting if true.
Interesting. Yes. I love Nick Pope, by the way.
Yeah.
God, I love Nick Pope. He was so good at Contact in the Desert a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was good.
Jackson Cagle, high five chat and panel. Weird is real. Weird is real. I love weird. Stay weird. Definitely stay weird. Stay strange. WG for $50. Now he'll be at he's a nice guy. Micah, who's supported the channel, and he goes to Cosmic Summit. He'll be there this year, and he apparently met you last year, met Micah last year, and looking forward to seeing you all again during Cosmic Summit 25. Should be a great time. Just hope Gary doesn't get his junk stuck in the plasmoid thunder generator again. We weren't going to talk about that, WG. Thanks a lot. That's not science, Gary. Not science. Thanks for putting me on blast there, buddy. WG's gifted 5 Nerdrotic Live memberships. We appreciate that. Trevor Wilson for $5 says, what do you think of biblical descriptions of angels in relation to our ability to perceive a fourth dimensional being? Ooh.
Do I have to tackle that one? Gosh.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I mean, the biblical descriptions of angels, naturally it became popular back in the, maybe beforehand really, but I mean, it was popularized in the 60s and 70s by Von Daniken and others.
Yes.
That maybe biblical and other world, literature from ancient epics like, the Vedas and what have you, to other ancient writings. Maybe these things, some of them represent extraterrestrial visitation. We can't rule that out. I think it's more likely, though, that those sorts of non-human intelligences or perception of the existence of them, as Keel and Vallée were describing, beginning with their early works on that subject in the 60s, what we read in world texts from antiquity and earlier is more akin to that than actual full-blood extraterrestrial contact. But I'll just point out, even Carl Sagan at one time had been a proponent of the idea and had written a paper about this, saying it would be worthwhile to look at archaeological sites and, maybe see if indeed there is not pictorial or other information conveyed that might be interpreted through our technological lens of today as being contact at some time. I still think that there's maybe reason to consider that. Maybe. It's just that I don't know that I am convinced that there's really strong evidence for it. And again, even though Sagan was a proponent of the search, he later came back around, I think, in Boca's brain and wrote, I'm not impressed by the data I've been shown as yet. Now, interesting thing, and I'll just really quickly say, if you talk with Von Daniken, as I have many times, he will tell you, I was never very impressed by the extraterrestrial theorists, the UFO people. He didn't like UFO research. Now think about that, because he said these people are like trying to take pictures of little things in the sky. He says that's not how we prove that they're out there. He says we need hard evidence. Now hard evidence will come in the form of archaeology, where we go out there and we find the archaeological evidence. That's how we prove that the extraterrestrials are coming to Earth. So it's interesting how there are very differing views that people in these communities have toward each other and others who are proponents of varying theories. Most would lump von Daniken in with the ufologists. He actually, for a long time, had disdain for them.
Yeah, the extraterrestrials. He's a really nice guy, by the way. And he was pretty much one of my gateway drugs into my theory. You know, I believed in ancient aliens before, but now I've totally different beliefs. So I did a report on aliens in the Bible. A very short time, I actually went to a city college. Now, of course, I didn't finish and everything, but my teacher was Cameron Crowe's mom. So Cameron Crowe, the director, his mom was my teacher. She gave me an A on my report. And it was evidence of UFOs and aliens in the Bible. And I went over the whole thing. And I still have it, by the way. I would totally change it now.
You should read it on the show.
You know what? I'll find it and I'll read it. Because like the manna from heaven is like a robot that gives out food and stuff. But I would completely rewrite it as it was leftover technology as opposed to alien technology now. But yeah, I got an A from Cameron Crowe's mom back in the day. Yeah. But you know, there's certainly a lot of stuff. The Bible's a trip. Okay. What angels are supposed to look like, all the eyes and like that
wheels with the eyes.
Shit. Yeah.
It's all about perception.
It's all about perception. I love the 3D like AI versions of what the angels look like now. That is creepy shit, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
It just makes me think of you know, what an apple looks like to a two-dimensional being, right?
Carl Sagan
did a circle.
Did a whole thing on
what
that.
What do we see when we see a 6D entity?
Yeah, we see that.
Like, what does it look like to us? We're gonna be
our
minds are gonna cry.
Yeah,
right.
No, Carl Sagan on Cosmos, which I used to watch religiously as a kid on PBS. He does a whole thing where he like shows you an apple and he's got like a little thing and little slices and he's like, well, this is the fourth dimension. And it's really good if you go watch it. It's a really good explanation of it.
That was based on Edwin Abbott's novella Flatland. Yeah. And again, I'll just say this. I mean, an interesting thing that we might extrapolate from that is you look at famous UFO cases like that of Dr. X that Vallée wrote about in books like Confrontations, where a pair of flying saucers are seen and then they suddenly merge together into one. And I'm like, you know, when we think about Edwin Abbott and the Flatlander, a two-dimensional being, when he perceives a horseshoe, we would see a U-shaped object, but to the Flatlander, is the horseshoe, let me orient myself so that the viewers can see, is the horseshoe actually intersects with the two-dimensional plane. There are two intersection points, right? And so the Flatlander would perceive two objects when in fact there is only one, right? Two parts of a three-dimensional object with two intersection points along the two-dimensional plane. And then I think back to like, okay, if a flying saucer, there are two of them, and then they merge into one, could it be that we're actually seeing a extra dimensional phenomenon intersecting with our three-dimensional reality? And if indeed the fourth dimension is time, I mean, could one make the argument? I don't know. This is just me building off. I'm building further off of what, you know, Sagan and Edwin Abbott before him had you know, extrapolated on. But I mean,
past in the future,
and then they meet at the same time and merge.
A fourth dimensional time machine intersecting with our dimensional reality, right?
Yeah. And there's UFO footage of lights melding into each other, turning into three, and then back into one. That's out there. I mean, how real it is, that's up to you. But fascinating. There's also a really good Doctor Who episode called Flatline where they deal with two-dimensional beings. It's a great Capaldi episode.
And the Orville. They drive.
That's right. Love the early Orville was really good.
Yes.
Well, according to Lazar, the craft generated its own gravitational field, but somehow during the test, there was a way to communicate with the pilot. They according to Lazar, Diego Salazar, he said they were able to communicate with the pilot via radio, even though there was supposedly a gravity field around, and he couldn't. He's like, I don't know how he did it. he's like, you really shouldn't have been able to, but they did. So
he also claimed that craft was from an archaeological dig.
Yes, he did.
I always found.
Well, one of them. He said
one of them. Right.
They were testing on one, but he saw multiple crafts, and one of them came from an archaeological dig.
Yeah.
So the one thing that, whether you believe Bob Lazar or not, the one thing I think we should consider, say, okay, if we have a ship, we don't understand it, and we're trying to extrapolate information from it, we're fucking with it. Excuse my language. No, it's my show. Whatever.
Yeah.
He talked about the danger. He talked about his predecessor dying, right? And the danger of like, you could blow the hell out of Nevada. We don't like if we are legitimately messing with stuff that we don't understand at all. It would be like a gorilla messing with a bomb, and chances are the gorilla or whatever animal wouldn't set it up, but there's a chance. So like that would be a concern. And you'd want your top minds working on it for sure, but
top
men.
We have top men on the job. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, top men on the job. Top men on the job.
But if that's like, there's a lot of ifs in there. But if that's real, like that would be a legit concern. I would be concerned about that.
Yeah.
I mean, not so much that I don't live in California anymore, but whatever.
Yeah.
Bubba Doom 1 for $20 says, no one talks about the incredible dinosaur museums down in Roosevelt and Vernal anymore. I got to speak up for those. When I was a wee lad, it wasn't Skinwalker that I wanted to see, but dinosaurs. They deserve attention. They're still finding them in Utah all the time.
They are. You know, while we were out there, right after, literally the day after Hitchhiker performed at the event, my brother and his wife and we went to Dinosaur National Park. And, you drive out there and into this incredible landscape where, I mean, this hill is pink and that hill is purple because the geology is so interesting. But you drive up into the area that's called the Quarry, and they've built this entire building onto this side of the mountain that they've excavated where they have revealed this dinosaur graveyard. And I mean, it is incredible to be standing there and to be able to just reach out and touch a femur or a neck bone. I mean, of all of these incredible animals, I mean, it's remarkable. And one thing I've often thought about is that, the traditional archaeological, aspects of that too. In fact, while we're walking through Dinosaur Park, I looked down and I saw a bifacial piece of chert laying on the ground that clearly it was a core where, the ancient, it was probably used as like a scraper for being able to remove sinew, hide, and meat off of bones after a kill. But whomever had struck this, I mean, probably made this thousands of years ago, and it's still laying on the ground right there at Dinosaur Park. And the rule is, when you're in the national parks, look but don't touch. Most people wouldn't even recognize archaeology like that. I've, of course, spent a lot of time in the field working with archaeologists and have learned about, different flint knapping techniques, point types, and lithic technology. So, I mean, there's archaeology, if you know what to look for, right there on the trail as you're walking through that place. And then dinosaur bones up there on the hill. But
that's awesome.
But then you go down into the valley, and as you're walking up through these mountains, and there are these crows or crow-like birds. I'm not sure which the indigenous species is, but they sit up there and they make these goofy little noises that remind you of the little creatures like Jawas and what have you, in Star Wars. You literally feel like you're on Tatooine. But you'll come around a corner and you'll see a rock shelter, and you'll see some of the original Fremont indigenous American stone art. I mean, petroglyphs where they've carved into the stone, and you see that art. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you see these representations of these godlike beings with these headdresses and antennae and all these different things, and they're carrying heads, severed heads and stuff. The Fremont art is really weird. It would be easy to look at those and say gods, aliens, demons. Then you go up the hill here and you see all these dinosaur bones laying around, and I'm like, it makes a lot of sense to me why people talk about skinwalkers and why the indigenous traditions involve these chimeric, half human, half monster, because they probably saw the fossil remains of literal dinosaurs there in Utah, and they probably had in their minds, there are things out there that are well beyond any of the creatures we're out here living alongside and hunting and thriving with. So, yeah, I've often thought that maybe the Skinwalker mythos maybe had one foot in the paleontology of the region.
And again, because those bones, especially back then, were just laying on the damn ground. And some medicine man or shaman probably saw like a skull, went, "Oh, this would be an awesome headdress, man."
Yeah,
some,
right.
Like, just horrible looking skull.
Yeah. Imagine a wash come in,
and
then you just see a skull laying in the middle of a creek, and you have no idea. You've never seen anything like this, never heard of it. Something that you've completely unexplainable. You have to explain it, and that's a really good explanation for all those kind of like mind virus, you say, is an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, it's like an idea that can infuse itself in the area and may not even be directly connected to this, but influence it.
Yeah. I mean, that's where everybody thinks, the global dragon theory comes from. Well, they just saw dinosaur bones. Yeah, maybe.
Just trying to fill the gaps in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Eli McGinnis says, "Hail, what does Micah think? Is hitchhiker phenomenon a ranch phenomenon or an off the ranch phenomenon? Thanks."
I would just say that, I mean, hitchhiker phenomenon is not unlike, I mean, corollaries that exist in parapsychological research are the idea of possession. That mind virus idea, again, some would refer to mind virus in reference to religion or sociocultural concepts, where people adopt a certain way of thinking, especially if it's a way of thinking that seems counter-logical. But this happens all the time in cultures, right? And that the idea that as an idea sort of goes viral and all of a sudden a bunch of people start adopting a really weird idea, that it's a mind virus. And some would say that ufology and belief in UFOs or alien visitation itself is a kind of mind virus. The way that Colin Kelleher and others were describing that with explicit reference to the so-called hitchhiker effect had been that a hypothesis for why some of the strange experiences were happening at the ranch had been that there was an intelligence behind some of this that they likened to, and again, in Kelleher's estimation, it was very explicitly in his hypothesis. Again, he couldn't prove this, but he hypothesized that a form of artificial intelligence of some kind was operating. Some sort of nexus point for that is there at the ranch, and therefore more experiences with strangeness happened there. But that it really effectively the paranormal phenomena that was experienced by attendees, people who visited the ranch, scientists who were tasked under NIDS, and then thereafter at the ALSAP program that was managed by Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Studies, that it was the breakdowns, the glitches in the matrix, that when those glitches occurred, that we perceive that as paranormal phenomena. So the interpretation that aliens are coming to the ranch and that they're flying saucers and stuff like that, and that they're interested in something at the ranch, that's the wrong way to think about this. Kelleher and others were saying it could be that when we go to the ranch and those things happen and we see those kinds of things and orbs and stuff flying around, those are glitches in the proverbial matrix. But as far as that question, I don't think it's just relegated to Skinwalker Ranch. There are reasons why people maybe experience more things at a location like that. And I think, again, Garrett, you'd talked about like geophysics and that possibility, whether, tectonic stressors could produce, whether it's plasmas. And again, there is some science that, suggests that plasmodial or other luminous phenomena could occur in coincidence with tectonic stress, which is the Earth light theory. Personally, I think there's something to that, and I think that that's happening down near my home, which is about an hour away from here, Brown Mountain, North Carolina. The famous Brown Mountain Lights.
Yep.
I think that may be happening there. Similar things happen at Hestel in Norway and other locations. But
Marfa Lights.
That's a place. Paulding is another place. But the NIDS team looked into that possibility. They even looked into the idea that in the natural gas drilling in the region that began decades ago, they had wondered if that might have stirred up, the release of gases or things, and that this could be creating some luminous phenomena that people were reporting as UFOs. They didn't find any explicit correlations there, but I have to hand it to them. There's this sort of cultural idea that Skinwalker Ranch is a paranormal hotspot, and they are poltergeist-like creatures and things that are seen out there. Some people describe that. Others don't. Some people have seen UFOs there. I know people, credible people, who have seen UFOs there. I was there and I never saw anything myself, but I didn't spend much time. But again, in the sum total of studying these phenomena, to me, it's not so much that, for whatever reason, the paranormal phenomena obey the property boundaries that are drawn by humans around that ranch. No, I think whatever's going on, it happens. It's ubiquitous throughout the Uinta Basin, and that's only one of several places where, for whatever reason, a lot of these things are observed. Right?
Yep. That's why I'm glad on the show they talk to neighboring places, because like you said, it's got to be happening everywhere, and it does.
Yeah.
The UFO sightings were all throughout the valley.
Oh yeah.
They talked to the Indian, the Indians from the reserve, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we have this stuff going on in this lake That's like
Yeah.
a few miles away.
the
and
lake
it's like
that's
all
pretty
the
close.
same kind.
The lake is
Right.
in an area called Bottle Hollow, and really, if you're leaving Skinwalker Ranch and you drive back up, you drive right by the Ute Reservation, which is right there, and Bottle Hollow is just a little ways up over there. And so, for people who like to try and go camp and see things, there's actually a little campsite right around on the back end of Skinwalker Ranch, across from where the Skinwalker property is, and they even advertise it. There's a sign for it right at the main gate going into Skinwalker Ranch where it's like, hey, if you want to camp, come check us out, And so you can camp there. You can also camp up at Bottle Hollow looking out over the reservoir. And I've never seen anything, but a lot of people.
See Garrett's eyes.
I'm like, how do we get there? Let's do a field trip.
Yeah.
You can,
Forbidden
yeah.
Frontier.
You certainly can. And I've camped at Bottle Hollow before, and again, didn't see anything.
Yep.
But that was my first experience staying in the Uinta, the immediate Skinwalker vicinity, which is literally overlooking the Ute Reservation right there. But while we were there, I was there with Chrissy Newton, actually, because she and I were out there covering. It wasn't Phenomenon, but there was another event, and we interviewed several witnesses to aerial phenomena there in the Uinta Basin, people who had worked with NEDs. And again, there are many people who describe seeing things. Cattle mutilations is something else you will hear a lot about out there in that area.
Cool. Phenomenon. We should go to Phenomenon.
Yeah, come on out. It'd be that'll be a real fun time. Let me just say. But we could go for a hike out in Dinosaur National Park.
Hell yeah.
I love that.
Just hail to all from Mark Shaw. Thank you, Mark. Simon Ho for 2 Canadian pesos says you are the real life Buckaroo Banzai Hong Kong Cavaliers. Highest form of compliment. Bubba Doom #1 for $2 says, how many UFOs are from Howard Hughes? He went gult. Howard Hughes didn't die. He just went home. That's all I got to say about it. Yeah, I don't know. The worst place on Reddit is Zero Coof. I thought Reddit was the worst place on Reddit.
Yeah, the whole website.
The whole thing's bad. It's nothing but NPCs forming about jabs and mandates. It's still active in 2025. They need help. Holy shit. Yeah, well, we can't help them. You know how you help yourself? Don't go to Reddit.
Yeah.
Reddit loves my channel on the other channel. Absolutely loves it. Favorite. We need Gary's school report readout. I'll find it. I kept it because it's one of the few things I got an A on in my life. Okay. I should have framed it, bronzed it. Okay. UFO, UAP until if one lands in the DC mall, Martin, if one lands in the DC mall, half the country won't believe it anyway. We've already discussed this. It's distractions. Nothing the government uniparty does is by accident. I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I think there are people who want to get the story out. I think there's people in the government who will go, sure, we'll give you some of the story to obfuscate something else. Maybe I just naturally don't trust the government. So, I mean, as somebody who's been a UFO enthusiast for a long time, I've seen how they have treated ufologists and people in ufology in the past. So it's hard to get over that. It's really hard to get over that. But the fact that, like, at least, 2017 was awesome. When the New York Times did that, however I feel about the New York Times, that was awesome because that was something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. So seeing that was great. But what's happened since, I think it's been very slow. Very, very slow. That's just my opinion, though. All right. It's gonna wrap it up for us today.
There's some rants and Streamlabs as well, if you want me to read them.
Yeah. Well, there's Zorbu. I got Zorbu on the Streamlabs
cool.
side for $20. Says
You
Travis
don't have to read it.
Oh, I'm going to read it.
You don't have to read it.
Mika, Zorbu is our resident alien who comes down and abducts Garrett quite regularly.
And probes
Zorbu
him.
for
Garrett,
$20.
for some reason.
That's unsubstantiated.
Only
fake
Garrett.
news.
Well, Zorbu said Travis Walton took it like a man, not like quarterback Garrett. He's a crier.
Quarter Earthling.
I only cried because you didn't cuddle me.
That was happy tears.
Happy tears. Jose Contreras says, why do I hear more about UFO sites in the USA and not all over the world? Is it a free speech thing? No.
It's all over the world.
It's all over the world.
Yeah.
It is all over the world. Actually, we might be, France and some South American countries, Colombia, they've been way more open about it than we have in the past. And I don't know about now. Mika would know far
Well,
more than I would.
You know, I've spent a lot of time in Brazil, and unfortunately, one of the greatest Brazilian ufologists, A.J. Gevard, passed away
Oh,
just last year, and he was just a delightful person and a dear friend. Tragic that he passed, but he spent a lot of time, you know, going to the National Archives in Brazil and you know, obtaining documents about their Operação Prato, which was their UFO Operation Saucer, is essentially what that basically translates to mean. That was in the late 1970s up there around Colares, where they were investigating sightings around that little northern Brazilian, you know, town very close to the coast, where people were seeing these things every night. Some people were being attacked. Beams of light were shooting down out of these craft and left visible scars on some people. Yeah, it was fascinating sitting down there, you know, and having a cerveza and talking with AJ, you know, for hours about this stuff. And of course, we have the famous cases, you know, that James Fox has spent so much time looking into, right? You know, but I mean, there are a lot of really good,
such a good documentary.
Yeah, Virginia.
Virginia,
There's also the Ubatuba case. Anyway, we could go on down the list, but the point I'm making is the Brazilian government has tried to be fairly open about that subject. Jacques Vallée has cataloged just dozens and dozens and dozens of highly credible UAP cases, including landings in France. And yet, again, there are a lot of skeptics who aren't familiar with a lot of the world literature about this subject, and they will say, again, coming back to the idea of a mind virus, well, UFOs are a cultural belief in the United States, and that's why only Americans see UFOs. Other people around the world don't see them. Maybe people in English-speaking countries do. That's nonsense. I mean, again, you go to another country where they don't speak English, and they have this phenomenon, and they have very similar descriptions of it, and they have similar attitudes and ideas and hypotheses they apply toward it, just like Americans do. It's not exclusive to the U.S. by any stretch of the imagination.
No, it isn't. Great answer. Abby Jones says, "Come play the farm." Thank you for $5. Dad Builds for $5 says, "Look forward to this stream every week." Hail, thanks all. Live an hour and a half from Brown Mountain, North Carolina myself. Man, I wanted to go out and see it. Not that I would see any lights, but I definitely wanted to go check it out. Because I've seen video of it, and it's like the old Will-o'-the-Wisp myth. You know, it kind of looked like that. But it definitely to me looked natural. It looked like some kind of natural thing that goes on. And there's a couple of good videos of the light bouncing around the mountain, like behind trees and stuff. And it's like, holy shit, that's pretty good. Yeah. Our last one, got to be careful reading this, but it's actually a legit question. Somebody not trying to be trollish. Pouncing Purple Panther for $5 says, you said the epitome of their gender. That's what Travis Walton said. Were these people blue-eyed? I'm just curious about the history of blue-eyed hominids and even aliens. And he says, I'm not some Aryan race weirdo. We didn't assume you were. Don't worry. There's the whole like Nordic aliens and whites. I don't know. I can't remember if they have blue eyes or not, though. I know they have like light hair, but
I think that's consistent with that alleged subgenre of humanoids associated with UAP sightings. Just to be clear, what Travis Walton was describing was that these people were muscular and they were very fit.
Human, yeah.
They were humans who, again, were very fit. They were in good shape. That's what he meant by that.
Yep. So it could have been just us. You know, maybe they didn't want to say too much because they're talking to somebody from the past. There's some kind of prime directive. Who knows? I'd like to believe there's a prime directive. I mean, it was ABBA. You're right, chat. It was ABBA.
There's a lot of blue-eyed blondies around here.
Yeah. Well, where you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you are.
That's where they come
All
from.
right.
That's what I mean.
Mika, thank you for giving us so much time.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. This has been a really fun show. I appreciate you. Hopefully we can talk again, and I'll see you in Cosmic Summit. You want to tell the fine folks where to find you?
Yes, of course. You know, I've got my my website. Where is it? Over here. There it is. Yeah. So
there it is.
You can follow my website there. TheDebrief.org also is where my team and we report on science, technology, UAP news when it's happening. all the podcasts and things there at my main website. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to Cosmic Summit this year. We always have a great time. George Howard is a good friend of mine. He puts on an incredible event, as you know. I didn't have enough time with you guys specifically at this last event. I know right after my lecture that X-Ray Girl had reached out and said, I didn't have time to talk to you and everything. And everybody's got so much stuff going on. So I hope this year to be able to, have a lot more one-on-one time with people, because it's just such a fun event. And that's one of the best things about those events is, getting to talk to people. The lectures are excellent. The panels are fun, but then you get to talk to everybody and, share ideas and express your own feelings about and thoughts about these topics. So I love all that. And George is doing a wonderful thing with Cosmic Summit. I look forward to seeing all you there. And I hope sincerely that people at home think about it, because it's a really fun event. Plus, I'm a little biased. It happens right here in Western North Carolina, or at least this half of the western half of North Carolina. Come to the Old North State, visit, and stay a while. We hope you'll enjoy the Cosmic Summit.
Hey, support North Carolina. They need support right now. Go. Yeah. They've had a hard time. So, and it's a beautiful state. Absolutely beautiful. Asheville was really freaking cool. Yeah.
It's so cool. But yeah, we were at ground zero when Hurricane Helene came through. Yes.
There's like a vintage video game like pinball place there that's freaking cool as hell that we got to hang out in, and I like that town. But if you can't join us, I'm pretty sure, is it going to be on HowTube? X-Ray Girl?
I believe every year they should be streaming it on HowTube. So even if you can't make it in person, you're gonna be missing out, but you can still stream it. Yeah,
you can see the lectures, and you get to keep them forever. And they're like, I go back and watch them. And I was there. I go back and watch them. The lectures were so good. So, Micah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. What do you got coming up, Quarter Black?
Tomorrow, we got a video releasing about Harry Potter and the Snape fiasco going on. And my show on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Normal World, me, Dave, Angela, shenanigans, as always. That's
Shenanigans will ensue. How about you, Mr. Crigler?
Well, I got my show. Monday through Friday, discussing stuff from all over the place. I love the debrief. I use different places to read from and like news and stuff, and just perusing that site. I was unaware of it, and man, I love it. It's exactly
great.
The kind of stuff that I like to read.
Cannot recommend it enough.
It's a really good site. Yeah.
So I'll be perusing. I'll do the daily debrief segment. I feel like it's great. So.
There you go. Well, there's always something interesting. That's for sure. We try to keep a finger on the pulse of science, technology, and just downright weird stuff when there's something interesting.
It's a really good. You keep it mixed up, and it's all pretty. It's related and engaging. And yeah, I was going. It's like a rabbit hole website. I love that's brilliant. That keeps the eyes on it too. It's also very good for the website.
Thank you.
What do you got coming up, X-Ray Girl?
I am still catching up on life, and hopefully I won't be sick this next week and then back to streaming schedule.
Yeah, just try not being sick. It's really inconvenient.
It's like a thing that I do every time I travel. Okay. But just to highlight Cosmic Summit, we do have the link in the description where you can go to the site, and if you use code Nerdrotic, you can get 10% off some of the passes if you're interested.
Worth it. Thanks to the Modrotics. Thanks to everyone who left super chat and donation. You help keep the lights on. We'll see you next week. Ciao, everybody.
Bye.
And turkey. Don't forget about turkey.
Don't forget about turkey.
Got to do that.
Go to Turkey.
Go to Turkey with us. All right. See ya.
Welcome to the Forbidden Frontier.